Queen Lyra's flagship pierces Earth's atmosphere, its sleek form casting an ominous shadow over the panicked cities below. The Saurian invasion fleet, led by the reptilian monarch with iridescent scales and piercing amber eyes, descends upon the unsuspecting planet. Earth's military forces scramble into action, their response a chaotic mix of desperation and determination. Captain Philip James, decorated Air Force pilot, grips the controls of his F-35 fighter. Adrenaline courses through his veins as he leads a squadron into the fray. The sky erupts in a deadly dance of human and alien technology, streams of bullets and energy weapons crisscrossing in lethal patterns. Philip's jet weaves through the onslaught, his exceptional skills allowing him to outmaneuver the Saurian fighters. He banks hard, locking onto an alien craft and unleashing a barrage of missiles. The enemy's ship explodes in a brilliant flash, debris raining down on the battlefield below. On the bridge of her command ship, Queen Lyra watches the aerial combat with growing interest. Her amber eyes narrow as she tracks the movements of Philip's jet, noting his superior tactics and daring maneuvers. A flicker of admiration crosses her reptilian features. "Capture that human pilot," Lyra commands, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Bring him to me alive." Saurian fighters converge on Philip's position, their weapons blazing. He rolls and dives, pushing his jet to its limits, but the alien technology proves too advanced. A direct hit rocks his aircraft, alarms blaring as systems fail. "Mayday! Mayday!" Philip shouts into his radio, smoke filling the cockpit. With no other choice, he grips the ejection handle and pulls. The canopy blasts away, and Philip is catapulted into the air. Wind rushes past him as he freefalls, the battlefield stretching out below. He reaches for his parachute cord, but before he can deploy it, a shimmering beam of energy engulfs him. Philip struggles against the Saurian tractor beam, his body suspended in midair as it pulls him towards the alien flagship. Fear and defiance war within him as he's drawn into the maw of the massive ship. Alien hands grab him, dragging him through metallic corridors. Philip fights every step of the way, earning bruises and admiring glances from his captors. They bring him to the bridge, where Queen Lyra awaits. Lyra rises from her command throne, her tall, life form radiating power and grace. She circles Philip, studying him with a mixture of curiosity and amusement. "You fought well, human," she says, her voice a silky purr. "Such spirit in such a small creature." Philip glares at her, refusing to be cowed. "We'll never submit to your invasion," he spits out. A smile plays at Lyra's lips, revealing sharp teeth. "Oh, I think you will. In fact, you'll be the key to your species' downfall." She gestures to her guards. "Fit him with a collar and leash. This one will be my personal pet." As the cold metal of the collar closes around his neck, Philip's mind races. He needs to find a way to turn the situation to his advantage, to save Earth from the Saurian threat. But as Queen Lyra leads him towards her private chambers, he can't help but notice the way her scales shimmer in the starlight, or the curious glances she keeps throwing his way. The doors to Lyra's quarters slide shut behind them, and Philip realizes that the fate of humanity may hinge on the complex dance of power, attraction, and cultural understanding about to unfold between captor and captive. The doors to Lyra's quarters slid shut with a soft hiss, leaving Philip alone with the alien queen. His heart raced, a mix of fear and anticipation coursing through his veins. The room before him was unlike anything he had ever seen, a fusion of organic and technological marvels that defied human understanding. Bioluminescent walls pulsed with a soft, ethereal glow, casting ever-changing patterns across the chamber. Holographic displays floated in midair, depicting star charts and battle formations that Philip struggled to comprehend. The air itself seemed alive, tingling against his skin with an alien energy. Lyra circled him slowly, her amber eyes gleaming with curiosity. "You intrigue me, human," she purred, her scaled fingers reaching out to trace the line of his jaw. "Such fragile creatures, yet you fought with such ferocity." Philip tensed at her touch, his mind racing. He needed to find a way out, to turn this situation to Earth's advantage. But as Lyra's fingers trailed down his neck, he couldn't help but notice the graceful way she moved, the iridescent shimmer of her scales in the shifting light. "I am not your pet," he said, his voice low but firm, "and humanity will not submit to your invasion." Lyra's lips curled into a smile, revealing pointed teeth. "We shall see," she replied, her tone both amused and challenging. She gestured to a nearby console. "Clean this for me, pet. I want to see how well you can follow orders." Philip hesitated, his pride warring with his need to gather information. After a moment, he moved towards the console, his eyes darting around the room as he walked. He noted the layout, the placement of what appeared to be control panels, searching for anything that could be useful. As he reached for the cleaning implement Lyra had indicated, he decided to take a risk. "You know," he said casually, "on Earth, it's customary for hosts to offer their guests refreshment, even captured ones." Lyra paused, her head tilting in a surprisingly bird-like manner. "Is that so?" she asked, intrigued despite herself. "Tell me more about these Earth customs." Seizing the opportunity, Philip launched into a description of human hospitality traditions, weaving in details about Earth's diverse cultures and histories. Lyra listened, her initial amusement giving way to genuine interest. She began to ask questions, her earlier commands forgotten as they engaged in conversation. Hours passed, and Philip found himself drawn into a fascinating exchange of ideas with the alien queen. He shared stories of human achievements, of art and music, and scientific discoveries. In return, Lyra spoke of Saurian culture, of worlds beyond the stars that Philip could scarcely imagine. As they talked, Philip's trained mind worked overtime, picking up on crucial details. He learned of the Saurians' heightened sensitivity to certain sound frequencies, filing the information away as a potential weakness to exploit. But he also found himself captivated by Lyra's intelligence and the complexity of her species' society. The Queen, too, was experiencing a shift in perspective. She had expected a simple, primitive creature, easy to dominate and control. Instead, she found herself intellectually stimulated, challenged even, by this human's quick wit and depth of knowledge. "Perhaps," Lyra said slowly, her eyes never leaving Philip's face, "we have underestimated your species." Philip saw his chance and took it. "There's so much more to learn about each other," he said earnestly. "Wouldn't it be better to explore our differences peacefully, rather than through conflict?" Lyra was silent for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, to Philip's surprise, she reached out and removed the collar from his neck. "You have given me much to consider, Philip James," she said, using his name for the first time. "I believe it would be wise to pause our advance and reassess our approach to your world." Relief flooded through Philip, tempered by caution. This was a significant victory, but the war was far from won. As Lyra turned to issue new orders to her fleet, Philip caught sight of movement by the door. A male saurian, his scales a darker hue than Lyra's, watched the scene with narrowed eyes before slipping away. Lyra, oblivious to the observer, turned back to Philip. "You will be given quarters adjacent to mine," she announced. "I have many more questions for you, and I believe your insights could be valuable as we reconsider our strategy." As Philip was led to his new room, his mind raced with the implications of what had transpired. He had bought Earth precious time and potentially opened a door to peaceful negotiations. But he had also formed a connection with Lyra that he hadn't anticipated, one that both thrilled and terrified him. Settling into his quarters, Philip gazed out at the stars, the enormity of his situation weighing heavily upon him. He had a chance to save his planet, but at what cost? And could he trust these newfound feelings for an alien queen, or were they merely a product of his extraordinary circumstances? With a deep breath, Philip steeled himself for the challenges ahead. The battle for Earth's future had entered a new phase, one where the lines between friend and foe, duty and desire, were blurred beyond recognition. As he prepared for his next encounter with Lyra, Philip knew that every word, every action, could tip the balance between peace and annihilation. As the first rays of dawn filtered through the translucent walls of Philip's quarters, he stirred from a restless sleep. The events of the previous day played through his mind like a surreal dream, but the alien surroundings quickly reminded him of his extraordinary circumstances. A soft chime echoed through the room, followed by a holographic message materializing before him. Queen Lyra's voice, now familiar, filled the air. "Your presence is required in the war room, human. Prepare yourself." Philip's heart raced as he donned the clothing provided for him, a strange, form-fitting suit that seemed to adjust to his body temperature. As he exited his quarters, he found 2 Saurian guards waiting to escort him. The corridors of the flagship bustled with activity, alien crew members casting curious glances at the human in their midst. Philip absorbed every detail, mapping the ship's layout in his mind. They arrived at a massive door adorned with intricate, swirling patterns that seemed to move of their own accord. As the door slid open, Philip was struck by the sheer scale of the war room. A massive holographic display of Earth and the surrounding space dominated the center, while Saurian officers huddled around various consoles. Queen Lyra stood at the head of a long crystalline table, her scales shimmering under the ethereal light. "Approach, Philip James," Lyra commanded, her use of his name drawing sharp looks from her advisors. Philip strode forward, acutely aware of the hostile gazes fixed upon him. One Saurian, larger and more heavily adorned than the others, glared at him with particular intensity. This, Philip surmised, must be General Zex. "We are reassessing our strategy for Earth's assimilation," Lyra began, gesturing to the holographic display. "Your insights have proven valuable. I would hear your thoughts on our current tactical positions." A ripple of disbelief ran through the assembled Saurians. General Zex's tail lashed in agitation. "My queen," he hissed. "Surely you don't mean to include this primitive in our war council?" Lyra's amber eyes narrowed. "I do, General. Unless you wish to question my judgment." Zex's scales flushed a deeper shade, but he bowed his head in submission. Philip, seizing the opportunity, stepped closer to the holographic display. He pointed to several key locations, his mind racing as he analyzed the alien formations. "Your forces here and here," he indicated, "are vulnerable to our long-range missile systems. And this concentration in the Pacific leaves you exposed to our submarine fleet." The Saurian officers muttered among themselves, some nodding grudgingly at Philip's observations. Lyra watched him intently, her expression unreadable. As the meeting progressed, Philip found himself drawn deeper into the discussions. He asked probing questions about Saurian technology and tactics, storing away crucial information while offering just enough insight to maintain his value. Suddenly, General Zex slammed his clawed hand on the table. "Enough of this farce," he roared. "We cannot trust a word of this human. For all we know, he feeds us lies to protect his pitiful world." The room fell silent, all eyes on Queen Lyra. She regarded Zex coolly, then turned to Philip. "Perhaps the general has a point. How can we be certain of your loyalty, human?" Philip's mind raced. He needed to prove his worth without compromising his true allegiance to Earth. An idea formed, bold and dangerous. "A test, then," he suggested. "A contest of sorts, to demonstrate the capabilities of both our species." Zex's eyes gleamed with predatory interest. "Yes," he growled, "a physical trial. Let us see how this frail human fares against Saurian might." Lyra considered for a moment, then nodded. Agreed. Prepare the arena. We shall see what our guest is truly capable of. As the war room emptied, Saurians rushing to prepare for the unexpected spectacle, Philip found himself alone with Queen Lyra. She stepped close, her alien features impossibly close to his. "I hope you know what you're doing, Philip James," she whispered, a note of concern in her voice. "Zex is not known for his mercy." Philip met her gaze, acutely aware of the complex emotions swirling within him. "I'll manage," he replied softly. "There's more to humans than meets the eye." Lyra's hand brushed his arm, sending an electric thrill through him. "For both our sakes, I hope you're right." As they made their way to the arena, Philip's mind whirled with possibilities. The contest ahead was fraught with danger, but it also presented an opportunity. He could gather more intelligence, gain respect among the Saurians, and perhaps even sway Lyra further from her conquest of Earth. The arena doors loomed before them, the sound of an expectant crowd filtering through. Philip took a deep breath, steeling himself for the trials ahead. As the doors began to open, he knew that the fate of two worlds might hinge on his performance in the alien gladiatorial ring. Arena, the massive doors swung open, revealing a circular pit surrounded by tiered seating filled with Saurian spectators. Their scaled forms shimmered in the harsh light, creating a dizzying kaleidoscope of color. General Zex stood in the center of the arena, his muscular form dwarfing Philip. The human's heart raced, but he forced himself to remain calm, analyzing his opponent's stance and movements. "Let us see how your human fares against true Saurian might," Zex growled, his eyes narrowing to slits. Queen Lyra's voice rang out from a raised platform. "The contest begins now. Victory goes to the last one standing." Zex lunged forward with surprising speed, his clawed hands slashing through the air. Philip ducked and rolled, narrowly avoiding the attack. He sprang to his feet, using his smaller size and agility to his advantage. The two combatants circled each other, Zex's powerful tail lashing behind him. Philip feinted left, then darted right, landing a quick jab to the Saurian side. Zex roared in anger, his neck swing catching Philip's shoulder and sending him sprawling. Pain bloomed across Philip's back, but he forced himself up, remembering his training. He noticed Zex's movements were predictable, relying on brute strength rather than strategy. Philip began to dodge and weave, letting the general tire himself out. As the fight wore on, Philip's stamina and quick thinking began to turn the tide. He used the arena's terrain to his advantage, leading Zex into obstacles and using the Saurian's momentum against him. The crowd's jeers turned to murmurs of surprise and grudging respect. In a final, desperate move, Zex charged at Philip, intending to use his full body weight to crush the human. Philip waited until the last second, then dropped and rolled. Zex, unable to stop his momentum, crashed into the arena wall with a sickening thud. The arena fell silent as Zex slumped to the ground, stunned. Philip stood, panting heavily but victorious. The Saurian spectators erupted in a cacophony of hisses and roars, a mix of disbelief and excitement. Queen Lyra descended from her platform, her amber eyes fixed on Philip. "The human has proven his worth," she declared, her voice carrying across the arena. "He shall be given the respect due to a worthy adversary." As Philip was led from the arena, he caught sight of Lyra's expression. There was something new in her gaze, a mixture of admiration and curiosity that sent a thrill through him. He had won more than just a physical contest. He had shifted the balance of power aboard the Saurian ship. In the days that followed, Philip found himself in a new position of influence. Saurian crew members regarded him with a wary respect, and he was granted more freedom to move about the ship. He used this opportunity to gather crucial intelligence, all while continuing his delicate dance of diplomacy with Queen Lyra. It was during one of their many conversations that Lyra surprised him with an unexpected summons. Your presence is required in my private chambers, she announced, her scaled fingers brushing against his arm. There is much I wish to learn about your world. Philip followed her through the ship's winding corridors, his mind racing with possibilities. As they entered Lyra's chambers, he was struck by the transformation of the space. Holographic displays flickered to life, showing images of Earth's cities, natural wonders, and cultural artifacts. I find myself intrigued by your species, Lyra admitted, her voice softer than usual. Tell me more about your world, Philip James. As they delved into discussions of human culture and history, Philip carefully wove in questions about Saurian technology and society. Lyra, caught up in the exchange, revealed more than she perhaps intended about her species' homeworld and the harsh environment that had shaped their evolution. Their bodies drew closer as the conversation deepened, an undeniable tension building between them. Philip found himself captivated by the play of light across Lyra's scales, the alien beauty of her form. Just as it seemed they might cross a line from which there was no return, a piercing alarm shattered the moment. Red lights pulsed throughout the chamber as a voice boomed over the ship's communication system. Attention all crew, this is General Zex. Queen Lyra has betrayed our cause by halting our glorious invasion. I hereby assume command of this fleet. We will resume our attack on Earth immediately. Lyra's eyes widened in shock, then narrowed in tenacity. We must stop him, she hissed, moving swiftly towards the door. Philip's military training kicked in as he assessed the situation. We need to regain control of the ship's key systems, he said, falling into step beside her. Communications, weapons, navigation. Can you access them from a secondary location? Lyra nodded, leading him through a series of hidden passages. They could hear the sounds of conflict echoing through the ship, the clash of weapons, shouts of confusion and anger. As they rounded a corner, they encountered a group of Zex's supporters. Without hesitation, Philip grabbed a nearby piece of equipment, using his knowledge of Saurian physiology to create a makeshift sonic disruptor. The rebels fell to their knees, disoriented by the high-pitched whine. Impressive, Lyra murmured as they stepped over the incapacitated Saurians. They fought their way through the ship, gathering loyal crew members as they went. Philip's quick thinking and combat skills complemented Lyra's knowledge of the ship's systems, making them a formidable team. As they approached the bridge, they encountered heavy resistance. In the ensuing firefight, a rebel soldier took aim at Philip. Lyra saw the danger and acted without thinking, pushing Philip aside and taking the blast meant for him. Philip caught her as she stumbled, supporting her weight. Their eyes met, a moment of unspoken understanding passing between them. The injury wasn't severe, but it changed something fundamental in their relationship. We end this now, Philip said, his voice low and determined. He turned to the loyal Saurian troops that had gathered around them. Here's what we're going to do. As Philip outlined his plan to retake the bridge, Lyra watched him with new eyes. This human, she realized, was unlike any being she had encountered in her travels across the stars. Whatever happened next would change the course of both their species forever. The loyal Saurian troops moved into position, ready to breach the bridge at Philip's command. The future of two worlds hung in the balance as Philip prepared to confront General Zex and end the invasion once and for all. All. Philip took a deep breath, his mind racing as he analyzed the situation. The loyal Saurian troops gathered around them, their scaled bodies tense with anticipation. He turned to Lyra, who nodded in silent agreement. It was time to act. Listen carefully, Philip said, his voice low but commanding. We'll split into two teams. The main force will create a diversion at the bridge's primary entrance. Meanwhile, a smaller group led by myself will infiltrate through the maintenance shaft. He quickly outlined the plan, detailing the use of makeshift sonic weapons and targeting Saurian weak points. As he spoke, Lyra's eyes widened with admiration at his strategic thinking. "Your knowledge of our physiology is impressive, Philip James," she said, a hint of curiosity in her voice. Philip allowed himself a small smile. "I pay attention." With the plan set, they moved into position. The main force, led by Lyra's most trusted officers, advanced on the bridge's entrance. The sound of weapons fire and shouts of confusion echoed through the corridors as they engaged Zex's forces. Philip, Lyra, and a select few Saurians slipped into the narrow maintenance shaft. The tight space was filled with the hum of the ship's systems and the rasp of scales against metal. Philip's human form allowed him to move more easily in the confined area, and he took point, leading them towards their goal. As they neared the bridge, Philip held up a hand, signaling for silence. He could hear the chaos of battle through the thin walls. With a nod to his team, he activated the makeshift sonic disruptor and burst through the access panel. The bridge erupted into pandemonium. Zex's supporters, caught off guard by the multi-pronged assault, scrambled to respond. Philip's agility allowed him to duck and weave through the fray, disarming Saurian guards with precise strikes to their nerve clusters. Across the bridge, he spotted General Zex at the main control panel, his clawed hands flying over the interface. With a jolt of horror, Philip realized he was activating the ship's primary weapons, targeting Earth. Without hesitation, Philip launched himself across the bridge. Time seemed to slow as he sailed through the air, his body on a collision course with the Saurian general. At the last moment, Zex turned, his eyes widening in surprise as Philip slammed into him. The two went down in a tangle of limbs, human and Saurian. Zex's superior strength immediately became apparent as he grappled with Philip, his powerful tail lashing dangerously close to the human's face. Philip fought with every ounce of his training and willpower, but he could feel himself losing ground. Zex's clawed hand closed around his throat, cutting off his air supply. Spots danced in Philip's vision as he struggled to break free. Suddenly, a high-pitched frequency filled the bridge. Philip felt Zex's grip loosen as the Saurian general's body went rigid. All around them, Saurians on both sides of the conflict lost focus, their movements becoming uncoordinated. Through the haze of his oxygen-deprived state, Philip saw Lyra at the auxiliary control panel, her injured form silhouetted by the flickering emergency lights. She had used her royal override codes to activate the ship's internal defense systems, targeting the Saurian's sensitive hearing. Seizing the moment, Philip broke free from Zex's grasp. In one fluid motion, he pulled a Saurian restraint device from his belt and secured it around the general's wrists. Zex roared in fury, but the fight had gone out of him. As the frequency faded, Lyra's voice rang out across the bridge. "This is your queen. General Zex has been neutralized. Stand down immediately." The remaining fighters lowered their weapons, the battle's momentum shifting in an instant. Lyra strode to the main communication array, her regal bearing on full display despite her injuries. "Attention, Saurian fleet," she broadcast. "This is Queen Lyra. I have regained control of the flagship. All hostilities against Earth are to cease immediately. Return to your assigned positions and await further orders." Philip moved to stand beside her, watching the tactical display as the majority of the fleet acknowledged her command and stood down. However, a small group of ships broke formation, their trajectories still aimed towards Earth. "Lyra," Philip said urgently, "those ships are still on an attack vector. We need to stop them before they can launch their weapons." Lyra's expression hardened as she assessed the situation. "We can use the flagship's main cannons to disable them," she said, her hand hovering over the weapon's control. Philip caught her wrist gently. "Wait," he said, his mind racing. "If we fire on them, we risk pushing the remaining fence-sitters into open rebellion. We need a show of force without casualties." Lyra's amber eyes met his, a mixture of conflict and trust swirling in their depths. "What do you suggest?" "The tractor beams," Philip said, pointing to the console. We can use them to deflect any projectiles they launch. It'll buy us time to find a peaceful solution. As if on cue, alarms blared across the bridge. The rogue ships had fired their first volley towards Earth. Lyra hesitated for a split second, then nodded sharply. "Do it," she commanded. Philip's fingers flew across the unfamiliar controls, activating the flagship's massive tractor beams. On the interface, they watched as shimmering fields of energy intercepted the projectiles, altering their course and sending them harmlessly into space. A cheer went up from the loyal Saurians on the bridge. Philip allowed himself a moment of relief before turning back to Lyra. "We've neutralized the immediate threat, but those ships are still a danger. We need to bring them back in line without bloodshed." Lyra nodded, her expression thoughtful. "What do you propose?" Philip outlined his plan quickly, drawing on his knowledge of human military strategy. Lyra listened intently, her respect for the human growing with each word. "Very well," she said when he finished. "We'll do it your way, Philip James." She turned to her weapons officer. "Target the rogue ship's weapon systems only. Precision strikes, no casualties." The flagship's advanced targeting systems locked onto the smaller vessels. With surgical precision, they fired, disabling the rebels' ability to attack without destroying the ships themselves. On the tactical display, they watched as the rogue ship's weapon signatures winked out one by one. A tense moment passed before communication channels lit up with surrender signals. Philip and Lyra shared a look of relief and something more, a growing intimacy born of shared struggle and mutual respect. As the adrenaline of battle faded, they found themselves standing close, the warmth of their bodies mingling in the cool air of the bridge. The moment was shattered by a sharp beep from the communication array. An incoming transmission from Earth's military command flashed on the screen, demanding answers about the recent events and the Saurian fleet's continued presence in orbit. Philip took a deep breath, realizing that the real challenge was just beginning. He turned to Lyra, his expression serious but hopeful. "This could be our chance for peace," he said softly. "To turn this near disaster into an opportunity for both our species." Lyra studied him for a long moment, her alien features unreadable. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Very well," she said. "Let us see what diplomacy can achieve where wars failed." As they prepared to address Earth's leaders, Philip felt the weight of two worlds on his shoulders. The view screen flickered to life, revealing the tense faces of humanity's representatives. Beside him, Lyra stood tall and regal, a queen ready to forge a new path for her people. Philip cleared his throat, acutely aware of the history-making moment that lay before them. "Greetings," he began, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his heart. "I am Captain Philip James, and I stand here with Queen Lyra of the Saurian Empire. We come before you today with an opportunity for peace. Peace and mutual understanding." As Philip's words hung in the air, the view screen flickered, revealing the stern faces of Earth's military leaders. General Hawthorne, a grizzled veteran with steel-gray hair, leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Captain James, explain yourself," he demanded. "Why is there a Saurian queen on our doorstep, and why shouldn't we consider this an act of war?" Philip took a deep breath, acutely aware of the weight of the moment. "General, what you're witnessing is an opportunity for peace. Queen Lyra has regained control of the Saurian fleet and halted the invasion. We stand ready to negotiate." Lyra stepped forward, her scales shimmering under the harsh bridge lights. "People of Earth," she began, her voice clear and steady, "I extend my sincerest apologies for the actions of General Zex. His attempt at invasion was unsanctioned and does not represent the will of my people." The human leaders exchanged glances, their skepticism evident. Philip, sensing their hesitation, made a bold decision. "To demonstrate our commitment to peace," he said, "Queen Lyra and I propose a diplomatic mission to Earth. We will meet with your leaders face to face to discuss the future of our two species. A murmur of surprise rippled through the Earth delegation. Lyra turned to Philip, her amber eyes wide with a mix of shock and admiration. "Are you certain?" she whispered. Philip nodded, his mind focused. "It's the only way to build trust." After a tense moment of deliberation, General Hawthorne spoke. "We'll need time to prepare. The UN Security Council must convene to discuss this unprecedented situation." "Understood," Philip replied. "We await your response." As the transmission ended, the bridge erupted into a flurry of activity. Saurian crew members rushed to prepare for the potential mission, while Lyra pulled Philip aside. "This is a significant risk," she said, her voice low. "Are you prepared to guarantee my safety on your world?" Philip met her gaze, unflinching. "With my life, if necessary." Over the next few hours, as they awaited Earth's decision, Philip and Lyra worked tirelessly to craft their message of peace. They pored over cultural briefings, debated diplomatic strategies, and fine-tuned their proposal for interspecies cooperation. Meanwhile, Saurian engineers modified a shuttle to accommodate human atmospheric conditions. Philip watched in fascination as they installed complex filtration systems and adjusted the gravity generators. "Your world's air is quite different from ours," a Saurian technician explained, his forked tongue flicking out as he spoke. "These modifications will ensure Queen Lyra's comfort during the visit." As news of the impending alien delegation spread across Earth, reactions were mixed. Philip monitored the transmissions from his home planet, his heart heavy as he watched protests erupt in major cities worldwide. "It seems not everyone shares our optimism," Lyra observed, joining him at the view screen. Philip nodded grimly. "Change is never easy, but we have to try." Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Earth's response came. The United Nations had agreed to host a diplomatic mission, with New York chosen as the meeting site. As Philip and Lyra boarded the modified shuttle with their small security detail, tension hung thick in the air. The descent through Earth's atmosphere was smooth, but Philip's stomach churned with a mix of anticipation and dread. Beside him, Lyra gasped as the blue and green expanse of Earth came into view. "It's beautiful," she whispered, pressing a clawed hand against the viewport. The shuttle touched down on the grounds of the United Nations, surrounded by a sea of flashing cameras and heavily armed security personnel. As the hatch opened, Philip straightened his Air Force dress uniform and offered his arm to Lyra. "Ready?" he asked. Lyra squared her shoulders, her regal bearing on full display. "Let us make history, Captain James." They emerged into the bright sunlight, the crowd's reaction a mix of awed silence and muffled gasps. Lyra's iridescent scales shimmered, casting rainbow reflections across the assembled dignitaries and press. Inside the UN building, they were escorted to the General Assembly Hall. As they entered, a hush fell over the room. Hundreds of eyes, representing nations from across the globe, fixed upon the striking pair. Philip stepped up to the podium, his heart pounding. He began his speech, introducing Queen Lyra and recounting the events that had led to this moment. As he spoke of peace and cooperation, he could feel the room's energy shifting, curiosity replacing fear. When it was Lyra's turn to address the assembly, she surprised everyone, Philip included, by speaking in halting but understandable English. "People of Earth," she began, her words careful and measured, "I come before you not as conqueror, but as friend. Let us build bridge between our worlds." The effect was immediate and powerful. Philip watched as hardened diplomats leaned forward, their expressions softening. Lyra's effort to communicate in a human language had done more to bridge the gap between their species than any formal treaty could have. As negotiations began in earnest, Philip found himself in the unique position of mediator. His understanding of both human and Saurian perspectives proved invaluable as he helped clarify misunderstandings and find common ground. Hours passed, and Philip could see fatigue setting in. Lyra's movements had become slower, the Earth's gravity and atmosphere taking their toll. Concerned, he called for a recess, suggesting they continue the next day. As they prepared to return to their shuttle, a commotion erupted outside. A group of anti-alien protesters had broken through the security cordon, their angry shouts filling the air. Philip's training kicked in instantly. He moved to shield Lyra, his body tense as they hurried towards their transport. Suddenly, a protester broke through, hurling an object directly at the Saurian queen. Without hesitation, Philip intercepted it, the projectile striking his shoulder with a dull thud. Pain blossomed across his arm, but he remained focused on getting Lyra to safety. Once aboard the shuttle, Lyra turned to him, her eyes wide with concern. "You're injured," she said, reaching for his shoulder. Philip winced as her clawed hand gently probed the bruise. "It's nothing," he assured her, even as his heart raced at her touch. As they lifted off to return to the flagship for the night, both were lost in thought. The day's events, the successful start of diplomacy, the challenges faced, and Philip's protective act had shifted something fundamental between them. Docking with the flagship, exhaustion hit them both. They had taken the first crucial steps towards peace, but the road ahead was far from smooth. "We should rest," Philip said as they disembarked. "Tomorrow will be another long day." Lyra nodded, her amber eyes meeting his. For a moment, neither moved, the air between them charged with unspoken emotions. Finally, Lyra spoke, her voice soft. "Thank you, Philip, for everything." As they parted ways, heading to their respective quarters, Philip's mind raced with the implications of their growing closeness. With the fate of two worlds hanging in the balance, he knew that navigating their personal relationship would be yet another challenge in the complex dance of interspecies diplomacy. Settling into his quarters, Philip closed his eyes, allowing the events of the day to wash over him. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new negotiations, and perhaps new understandings between humans and saurians. For now, he needed rest, for the real work of forging lasting peace was only just beginning. Beginning. Philip's eyes snapped open, his mind still racing with the events of the previous day. He sat up, running a hand through his disheveled hair, when a sharp knock at his door jolted him fully awake. "Captain James," a saurian voice called. "Your presence is required immediately." Philip quickly donned his uniform and made his way to the bridge. As he entered, he saw Lyra already there, her regal posture betraying a hint of tension. "What's the situation?" he asked, moving to stand beside her. Lyra turned to him, her amber eyes reflecting concern. "There's unrest among the crew. Many are struggling to accept our new direction." Philip nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "What do you propose?" "An assembly," Lyra said firmly. "I need to address everyone directly. And I'd like you to stand with me." Without hesitation, Philip agreed. They made their way to the vast hangar bay, where thousands of saurians had gathered. The air hummed with nervous energy as Lyra stepped forward, Philip at her side. "My people," Lyra began, her voice carrying across the cavernous space. "I understand your confusion and concern. Our path has changed, but our strength remains." She went on to explain the potential benefits of peace with humans, emphasizing the opportunities for cultural and technological exchange. As she spoke, Philip noticed the crowd's mood shifting, curiosity replacing apprehension. "Look at Captain James," Lyra said, gesturing to Philip. "He exemplifies the best of humanity, brave, intelligent, and compassionate. Through cooperation with such individuals, we can achieve greatness beyond our imagining." Philip stood tall, acutely aware of the thousands of alien eyes upon him. He saw a mix of reactions in the crowd, some nodding in agreement, others whispering skeptically to their neighbors. As the assembly concluded, a group of saurian scientists approached. The lead researcher, a tall, slender saurian with pale blue scales, addressed Lyra excitedly. "Your Majesty, we've made a breakthrough," he said. "We believe we can temporarily alter saurian physiology to better withstand Earth's environment." Lyra's eyes widened with interest. "Explain." The scientists launched into a detailed description of their process, involving genetic manipulation and nanotech infusion. Philip listened intently, his mind racing with the implications. "I volunteer to be the first subject," Lyra declared. Philip's head snapped towards her. "Are you sure? The risks are necessary," Lyra finished. "This could change everything." In the medical bay, Philip watched anxiously as the saurian scientist prepared Lyra for the procedure. She lay on a metallic table, surrounded by humming equipment. "I'll be right here," Philip assured her, taking her clawed hand in his. The transformation began. Philip watched in amazement as Lyra's appearance slowly changed. Her scales became less pronounced, her respiratory system adjusted, and her muscular structure shifted. Hours passed, and finally, the procedure was complete. Lyra sat up, looking down at her altered form with wonder. Her scales now appeared as a subtle, shimmering pattern on her skin, and her amber eyes, while still alien, were less reptilian. "How do you feel?" Philip asked, unable to take his eyes off her. Lyra flexed her fingers, took a deep breath, and smiled. "Strong, different yet still myself." Energized by the success, Lyra turned to Philip with a glint in her eye. "Let's test this new form. Take me to Earth, not for diplomacy, but to truly experience your world." Philip hesitated, weighing the risks against the potential benefits. Finally, he nodded. "All right, but we'll need to be discreet." Under the cover of darkness, they boarded a small, cloaked shuttle. As they descended towards Earth, Philip selected a landing site near a quiet coastal town. The shuttle touched down in a secluded area. As they stepped out, Lyra gasped, her feet sinking into the sand. She wiggled her toes, laughing with childlike delight. "It's so soft," she marveled. Philip led her through the sleeping town, watching her reaction to the simple human structures and signs of everyday life. They stopped at a small 24-hour diner, its neon sign casting a warm glow. Inside, Lyra sampled her first human meal, a stack of blueberry pancakes. Her eyes widened as she took a bite. "This is incredible," she said, savoring the new flavors. As dawn broke, they walked along the beach. The rising sun painted the sky in brilliant hues, reflecting off the waves. "Your world is beautiful, Philip," Lyra said softly. Suddenly, a cry for help shattered the peaceful morning. They spotted a fishing boat in distress offshore, waves threatening to capsize it. Without a word, Philip plunged into the water, swimming towards the boat. To his surprise, Lyra was right beside him, her new physiology allowing her to move efficiently through the water. Together, they reached the boat and helped the panicked fishermen to safety. As they guided the grateful men back to shore, Philip realized a crowd had gathered on the beach. Whispers rippled through the onlookers as they recognized the alien queen. Philip stepped forward, his military training kicking in as he addressed the growing crowd. "Good people," he began, his voice calm and reassuring. "I know this is unexpected, but I assure you, we come in peace." He introduced Lyra, explaining their mission of goodwill. The townspeople listened, their initial fear giving way to curiosity as they observed the alien queen's more relatable appearance and her role in the rescue. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Philip knew they had to return to the flagship. They said their goodbyes to the townspeople, many of whom now smiled and waved. Back on the shuttle, Lyra's expression was thoughtful. "That was enlightening," she said. "I understand your people better now." Philip nodded, feeling a mix of accomplishment and apprehension. He knew their unauthorized trip would have consequences, but he couldn't bring himself to regret it. As they docked with the flagship, Philip's heart sank. General Zex stood waiting for them, his expression grim. "Captain James, Your Majesty," Zex said, his voice tight. "The High Council demands an explanation for recent events. They're waiting to speak with you both." Philip and Lyra exchanged a look, silently preparing themselves for the challenge ahead. As they followed Zex to the communication chamber, Philip felt Lyra's hand brush against his, a subtle gesture of unity in the face of uncertainty. Uncertainty. As they entered the communication chamber, the atmosphere was tense, the High Council's holographic projections looming large before them. Before Philip could speak, General Zex stepped forward, his eyes glinting with barely concealed triumph. "Esteemed Council, I present evidence of a grave betrayal." With a flick of his wrist, Zex activated a large display screen. Gasps echoed through the chamber as footage of Lyra's transformed appearance filled the screen. Her more human-like features were unmistakable, her scales now a subtle shimmer on her skin. "Our queen has forsaken her true form," Zex declared, his voice dripping with disdain. "She chooses to mimic these humans rather than lead our people with pride." Murmurs of shock and outrage rippled through the room. Philip watched as Lyra's posture stiffened, her eyes narrowing at Zex's accusation. "You misunderstand," Lyra began, her voice steady despite the tension. "This transformation is a step towards better understanding and cooperation with Dash." Her words were cut short as alarms blared throughout the ship. Red emergency lights bathed the chamber in an eerie glow. "What's happening?" Philip demanded, his military instincts kicking in. A young Saurian officer burst into the room, his scales pale with fear. "Your Majesty, General, we're losing control of the ship systems. A group of dissenters is attempting to seize the weapons array." Zex's eyes widened in genuine surprise. "This was not my doing," he insisted, but Philip could see the wheels turning in the General's mind, calculating how to use this chaos to his advantage. "We need to secure the critical areas of the ship," Philip said, turning to Lyra. "Your Majesty, we must act quickly." Lyra nodded, her transformed features set in commitment. "Agreed, General Zex. Despite our differences, the safety of the ship and crew must come first. Will you assist us?" Zex hesitated, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he gave a curt nod. "For the good of our people, I will." As they hurried through the corridors, Philip could feel the ship's atmosphere changing. Crew members eyed Lyra with a mix of confusion, fear, and in some cases, outright hostility. Her altered appearance had clearly shaken their faith. They reached the main security hub, where loyal Saurian officers were desperately trying to maintain control of the ship systems. "Report," Lyra commanded. A harried officer looked up from his console. "The dissenters have locked down the weapons control room. They're threatening to fire on Earth if we don't immediately withdraw from the system." Philip's mind raced. "We need to cut them off from the main power grid. It won't disable the weapons entirely, but it'll buy us time." As they worked to contain the crisis, a new complication arose. A sleek Saurian shuttle docked with the flagship, and soon after, a regal figure strode onto the bridge. "I am Vex, emissary of the High Council," the newcomer announced. "I've been sent to assess this situation." Vex's eyes narrowed as they fell on Lyra's transformed appearance. "It seems the reports were not exaggerated. Your Majesty, you have much to explain." Before Lyra could respond, another alarm sounded. A communication officer called out, "Incoming transmission from Earth. The United Nations is demanding we withdraw our fleet to a safe distance immediately." The tension in the room reached a fever pitch. Philip could see the strain on Lyra's face as she grappled with the mounting crises. "We need to address both our people and the humans," Philip said urgently. A joint broadcast might be our only chance to prevent this situation from spiraling into war. Lyra nodded, but Vex interrupted. That may not be possible, Captain. Our scientists have just reported an alarming development regarding the Queen's condition. All eyes turned to Lyra as Vex continued. The genetic modifications are progressing beyond their initial parameters. We don't know how this will affect Her Majesty in the long term. Lyra stumbled slightly, and Philip moved to support her. He could feel a slight tremor in her body, a sign that the changes were indeed continuing. Regardless of the risks, Lyra said, her voice firm despite her physical unease, we must make this broadcast. The fate of both our species depends on it. As they made their way to the communication center, Philip's mind whirled with the enormity of the task before them. They would have to navigate the complex web of Saurian politics, soothe human fears, and somehow find a path to peace, all while dealing with Lyra's uncertain condition and a potential mutiny on the ship. The doors to the communications center loomed before them. Philip took a deep breath, preparing himself for what might be the most important broadcast in the history of both species. Suddenly, a new alarm blared through the ship, different from the others. Confusion spread across the faces of both humans and Saurians. What now? Philip asked, a sense of dread growing in his stomach. A young Saurian officer rushed up to them, his scales pale with fear. Captain, Your Majesty, our long-range sensors have detected something, a massive energy signature, approaching fast from the outer reaches of the solar system. Lyra and Philip exchanged a look of bewilderment. Whatever this new threat was, it was clear that the already volatile situation had just become exponentially more complex. Complex. Philip opened his mouth to inquire further, but his words were drowned out by a new, piercing alarm that echoed through the corridors. Status report, Lyra commanded, her transformed features tightening with concern. The young Saurian officer's claws flew over the control panel. It's Earth, Your Majesty. We're detecting a massive energy surge from their direction. Multiple vessels are approaching at high speed, armed with something we've never seen before. Philip's blood ran cold. He recognized the telltale signs of a military offensive, but this was no sanctioned operation. It's got to be a rogue faction, he muttered, his mind racing. No way the UN would authorize this. Not after everything we've accomplished. As if in response to his thoughts, the ship's communication array crackled to life. A familiar face filled the screen. General Hawkins, Philip's former superior officer. His expression was a mask of steadfast perseverance. This is General Hawkins of Earth's Defense Force, he announced, his voice booming through the speakers. Alien vessels, you will power down your systems and prepare to be boarded. Any resistance will be met with lethal force. Lyra stepped forward, her eyes flashing with a mix of anger and disbelief. General Hawkins, this is Queen Lyra of the Saurian Empire. Your actions are in direct violation of our peace treaty. Stand down immediately. Hawkins' lip curled in disgust as he took in Lyra's altered appearance. We don't negotiate with shape-shifting aliens. Your attempts to infiltrate our society end now. The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Philip turned to Lyra, his expression grim. We need to act fast. If Hawkins' forces reach us, it'll be all-out war. Before Lyra could respond, a wave of high-frequency sound slammed into the ship. Saurian crew members clutched their heads in agony, scales rippling as they fought to stay conscious. Philip winced at the painful noise, but to his surprise, Lyra seemed unaffected. The weapons, she gasped, realization dawning. They're based on the sound weakness you discovered. But my new physiology. Philip nodded, quickly grasping the implications. You're resistant. Lyra, you need to take command of the fleet's defenses. You're our best chance at coordinating a response without casualties on either side. As Lyra sprang into action, barking orders and rallying her disoriented crew, Vex watched with growing admiration. The emissary's initial skepticism began to waver in the face of Lyra's capable leadership. "I'll contact the United Nations," Vex announced, moving towards a secondary communication station. "They must be made aware of this unauthorized aggression." Philip's tactical mind was already formulating a plan when another crisis erupted. General Zex's voice boomed over the ship's intercom, thick with triumph. "Attention all loyal Saurians. The time has come to seize our destiny. I have taken control of the engine room. Either we withdraw from this system immediately, or I'll overload the power core. The resulting explosion will cleanse this planet of the human infestation." Lyra's eyes met Philip's, a silent understanding passing between them. Without a word, Philip turned and sprinted from the bridge, gathering a team of loyal Saurians as he raced towards the engine room. The corridors became a battlefield as Philip led his makeshift squad through the chaos. He drew on every ounce of his Air Force training, adapting human combat tactics to the alien environment. The Saurians under his command watched in awe as he outmaneuvered Zex's forces, using the ship's architecture to their advantage. As they fought their way closer to the engine room, Philip could feel the vibrations of the ship's core growing stronger. Time was running out. Back on the bridge, Lyra made a decision that would change the course of history. "All ships, form a defensive perimeter around Earth," she commanded, her voice steady despite the strain. "We will protect this planet, even at the cost of our own lives." The Saurian fleet moved into position, their sleek vessels forming a living shield between Earth and the potential devastation of the flagship's explosion. Across the planet, millions watched in awe as their would-be conquerors became their protectors. In the engine room, Philip faced off against General Zex. The Saurian towered over him, muscles rippling beneath iridescent scales. "You're too late, human," Zex snarled, his clawed hand hovering over the final failsafe. Philip's mind raced, analyzing every detail of his surroundings. In a flash of inspiration, he feinted left, then dropped low, using Zex's own momentum against him. The general stumbled, his claws missing the controls by mere inches. With a burst of strength, Philip tackled Zex, the two of them grappling on the vibrating floor of the engine room. It was a desperate struggle, human ingenuity against Saurian might. Just as Zex's claws closed around Philip's throat, the human captain struck a precise blow to a cluster of nerve endings he'd observed during his time among the Saurians. Zex's eyes rolled back, his massive form going limp. Philip scrambled to his feet, quickly securing the unconscious general and stabilizing the power core. As the immediate danger passed, Philip became aware of a flurry of activity on his communicator. Earth's official forces had joined the fray, turning on Hawkins' rogue faction. The tide of battle had shifted, creating an unprecedented moment of human-Saurian cooperation. Exhausted but triumphant, Philip made his way back to the bridge. He found Lyra at the main communication array, preparing to address both species. As he approached, her legs buckled, and she collapsed into his arms. "Lyra!" he cried, cradling her transformed body. Her skin burned with fever, the shimmering scales pulsing erratically. "We need a medical team here now." As Saurian medics rushed to stabilize their queen, Philip found himself facing the communication array alone. The weight of two worlds pressed down on him as he realized the magnitude of what he had to do. With a deep breath, Philip stepped forward, his image projected to every screen on Earth and every Saurian ship. The fate of two species hung on his words, even as his heart ached with concern for Lyra. He opened his mouth to speak, knowing that the next few moments would shape the future of human-Saurian relations forever. Philip took a deep breath, steadying himself as he faced the communication array. The fate of two species hung in the balance, and he knew every word would count. With a final glance at Lyra's unconscious form, he began his address. "People of Earth, "Citizens of the Saurian Empire," he began, his voice clear and steady. "I stand before you today not as a human or a member of the Saurian fleet, but as a representative of both our peoples." As Philip spoke, his words resonated across the vastness of space and throughout the cities of Earth. He recounted the recent events, emphasizing the moments of cooperation between humans and Saurians in the face of shared threats. "We've seen today that when we work together, we can overcome any challenge," Philip continued. "The Saurian fleet's decision to protect Earth from potential harm demonstrates the true spirit of our alliance." Just as Philip was about to address the concerns about Lyra's condition, a Saurian medical officer approached him, urgency evident in every movement. The officer whispered in Philip's ear, and Philip's expression tightened momentarily before he regained his composure. "I've just received an update on Queen Lyra's condition," Philip announced, his voice carefully controlled. "Her transformation is accelerating, putting significant strain on her body. However, our medical teams are working tirelessly to stabilize her condition." Philip paused, weighing his next words carefully. In fact, this situation presents an unprecedented opportunity for cooperation. A joint team of human and Saurian medical experts is preparing to perform a groundbreaking procedure to halt the transformation process and save Queen Lyra's life. As Philip concluded his speech, emphasizing the potential for a peaceful future built on mutual understanding and cooperation, activity behind him intensified. Dr. Elena Rossi, a human xenobiologist with piercing blue eyes and a determined set to her jaw, conferred with Dr. Cross, a Saurian genetic expert whose scales shimmered with an iridescent sheen. "The procedure carries significant risks," Dr. Rossi explained to Philip as soon as he stepped away from the communication array. "But it's our best chance to save her life and potentially unlock new avenues for both our species." Philip nodded, his eyes never leaving Lyra's prone form. "Do it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Whatever it takes." As the medical team began their preparations, the ship's communication system crackled to life once more. The stern visage of a Saurian High Council member filled the screen. "Captain James," the counselor's voice boomed, "we demand that Queen Lyra be returned to the Saurian homeworld immediately. Her condition and her associations with humans have compromised her ability to lead our people." Before Philip could respond, another transmission cut in. This time, it was a representative from Earth's United Nations. "We cannot allow Queen Lyra to leave at this critical juncture. Her presence is vital to maintaining the peace between our species." Philip's mind raced, aware that this diplomatic standoff could easily reignite the conflict they'd just narrowly avoided. "With all due respect to both the Saurian High Council and Earth's leadership," he interjected, "Queen Lyra's health must be our primary concern. I propose that we proceed with the joint human-Saurian medical team, with representatives from both species overseeing the process. This will ensure transparency and build trust between our peoples." There was a tense moment of silence before both sides reluctantly agreed to Philip's proposal. As the final preparations for the procedure began, Philip allowed himself a brief moment of relief. However, his respite was short-lived. Alarms blared throughout the ship, their urgent wailing sending crew members scrambling to their stations. A young Saurian officer rushed to Philip's side, her scales pale with fear. "Captain," she reported breathlessly, "we've detected multiple ships approaching. They're using false diplomatic credentials, but their energy signatures match those of General Hawkins and General Zex's forces." Philip's face hardened as he realized the gravity of the situation. "How did they?" he began, but shook his head, knowing there was no time for questions. "Lock down all docking bays. Redirect all non-essential power to our shields." As Philip barked out orders, coordinating the ship's defenses, Dr. Rossi called out from Lyra's bedside. "Captain, we need to start the procedure now. Her vital signs are becoming erratic." Philip found himself torn between his duty to defend the ship and his desire to remain by Lyra's side. With a final glance at the medical bay, he made his decision. "Begin the procedure," he commanded. "I'll ensure you have the time you need." As Philip raced through the corridors, rallying both human and Saurian crew members to defend the ship, the sounds of combat grew closer. The infiltrators had breached the outer defenses and were fighting their way towards the medical bay. Philip reached the final corridor leading to Lyra's location just as the first wave of attackers rounded the corner. He raised his weapon, his voice steady as he addressed the mixed group of defenders behind him. "Remember," he said, "we're fighting not just for Queen Lyra, but for the future of both our species. Hold this line." As the attackers charged forward, Philip stood his ground, knowing that everything hinged on what happened in the next few moments. Behind him, the machines monitoring Lyra's vital signs began to emit urgent warnings, adding to the chaos of the battle about to unfold. The attackers burst through the makeshift barricade, their weapons blazing with energy bolts that sizzled through the air. Philip dove behind an overturned console, his mind racing to formulate a plan. "Hold the line," he shouted, his voice carrying over the din of battle. "We can't let them reach the medical bay." The mixed group of human and Saurian defenders fought with fierce purpose, their loyalty to Lyra and the cause of peace evident in every calculated shot and strategic maneuver. Philip led by example, his Air Force training allowing him to anticipate and counter the enemy's moves with uncanny precision. As the firefight intensified, alarms blared throughout the ship. A young Saurian officer crawled to Philip's position, her scales pale with urgency. "Captain," she reported, her voice strained, "multiple hull breaches detected. General Zex's loyalists have infiltrated the ship." Philip's eyes widened as he processed this new threat. "How did they dash?" he began, but shook his head, knowing there was no time for questions. "We need to split our forces. You," he pointed to a group of human security officers, "stay here and hold this position. The rest of you, with me. We need to seal off the breached areas." As Philip led his team through the ship's winding corridors, a strange mist began to seep through the ventilation systems. Within moments, several crew members stumbled, their movements becoming erratic and uncoordinated. "Environment suits now," Philip barked, recognizing the telltale signs of a biological agent. He helped the disoriented Saurian into her suit before donning his own, his fingers working with practiced efficiency. Through the suit's comm system, Dr. Elena Rossi's voice crackled with urgency. "Captain, we've made a breakthrough with Lyra's condition, but we need her conscious to complete the process. It's risky, but it might be our only chance to neutralize this pathogen." Philip's mind raced, weighing the potential consequences. "Do it," he ordered, his voice tight with tension. "We'll buy you as much time as we can." As Philip and his team fought their way towards the central control room, the ship groaned and shuddered around them. Sections began to depressurize, forcing them to seal off entire decks to prevent being sucked into the vacuum of space. In the medical bay, Lyra's eyes fluttered open, her partially transformed body racked with pain. "What's happening?" she gasped, her gaze focusing on Dr. Rossi's concerned face. "Your Majesty," Rossi explained quickly, "your DNA might be the key to stopping this attack. We need your help to synthesize a cure." Despite her weakened state, Lyra nodded, her perseverance evident in the set of her jaw. "Whatever it takes," she said, wincing as she sat up. "Our people, both our people, are counting on us." As the medical team worked feverishly, Philip's group encountered heavy resistance near the control room. The close-quarters combat pushed them to their limits, with Philip using every trick he'd learned about Saurian physiology to gain an advantage. He ducked under a Saurian warrior's swipe, using the alien's momentum to throw him off balance. In the same fluid motion, Philip struck at a cluster of nerves near the base of the Saurian skull, rendering him unconscious. "We're almost there," Philip called out, gesturing towards the control room's reinforced doors. "Prepare for dash." His words were cut short as the doors exploded outward, revealing the towering figure of General Zex. The Saurian's eyes blazed with fury as he locked gazes with Philip. "You've interfered for the last time, human," Zex snarled, his claws extending menacingly. Philip squared his shoulders, acutely aware of the weight of the moment. "This ends now, Zex," he replied, his voice steady. "One way or another." As Philip and Zex circled each other, preparing to engage in what could be their final confrontation, the ship's view screens flickered to life. The space around Earth had erupted into chaos, with loyalist Saurian ships engaged in a spectacular battle against a rogue faction. In the medical bay, Lyra gritted her teeth against the pain, her body trembling with the effort of maintaining consciousness. "Almost. There," she gasped, her eyes fixed on the swirling vial of synthesized cure. Dr. Kraz, the Saurian genetic expert, monitored Lyra's vital signs with growing alarm. "We're losing her," he warned, his normally stoic voice tinged with concern. "We may have to choose between completing the cure and saving the Queen's life." Lyra's hand shot out, grasping Dr. Rossi's arm with surprising strength. "The cure," she insisted, her eyes blazing with perseverance. "Our people come first." As the fate of two species hung in the balance, Philip launched himself at General Zex, their bodies colliding in a furious tangle of human and Saurian limbs. The control room erupted into chaos as the two leaders fought for dominance, each blow potentially deciding the future of human-Saurian relations. Outside, the space battle intensified, creating a dazzling and terrifying light show visible from Earth's surface. Panic reports flooded in from around the globe as humanity grappled with the reality of the cosmic conflict unfolding above them. In this crucible of violence and hope, the next few moments would determine whether the fragile alliance between humans and Saurians would shatter or emerge stronger than ever before. As Philip and Zex circled each other, the tension in the control room crackled like static electricity. Zex lunged forward, his claws slashing through the air. Philip ducked, feeling the rush of wind as the attack missed him by mere inches. He countered with a swift kick to Zex's midsection, causing the Saurian to stagger back. The two leaders engaged in a furious dance of strikes and counterstrikes, their bodies blurring with the speed of their movements. Philip's human agility allowed him to evade Zex's powerful blows, while his knowledge of Saurian physiology helped him target vulnerable points. As they fought, the control room became a casualty of their battle. Consoles sparked and shattered under the impact of thrown bodies. Philip rolled across a bank of screens, feeling them crack beneath his weight. He sprang to his feet, narrowly avoiding Zex's tail as it whipped past his head. "You can't win, human," Zex snarled, his eyes blazing with hatred. "Your species is weak, unworthy of the power you seek." Philip didn't waste breath on a response. Instead, he feinted left, then dropped low, sweeping Zex's legs out from under him. The Saurian general crashed to the floor with a resounding thud. In the medical bay, the sounds of the distant battle were drowned out by the urgent beeping of medical equipment. Dr. Rossi's hands flew over the controls, her face a mask of concentration as she worked to stabilize the cure synthesis process. "We're losing power," Dr. Kraz called out, his scales shifting colors in agitation. "The equipment can't handle these fluctuations." Lyra's eyes fluttered open, her gaze unfocused but determined. What can I do?" she gasped, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Rossi glanced at the Queen, her expression torn between concern and hope. "Your Majesty, we need to complete the final bonding sequence. But in your condition—" "Do it," Lyra commanded, gritting her teeth against the pain. She pushed herself up, ignoring the protests of her body. "Our people need this cure. I won't let them down." Back in the control room, Philip seized his advantage. He delivered a series of precise strikes to Zex's pressure points, techniques he'd learned during his cross-species combat training. The Saurian general's movements became sluggish, his attacks losing their deadly accuracy. With a final, decisive move, Philip executed a complex grapple, using Zex's own strength against him. The Saurian crashed into a bank of controls, his body going limp as he finally lost consciousness. Panting heavily, Philip surveyed the damaged control room. He limped to the main console, his fingers flying over the keys as he worked to regain control of the ship's systems. Lights flickered, then stabilized as he rerouted power to critical areas. "This is Captain James," he announced over the ship-wide communication system. "The control room is secure. All loyal crew members, report to your stations and prepare to repel any remaining insurgents." As Philip's voice echoed through the ship, a renewed sense of purpose filled the defenders. Human and Saurian alike fought with increased vigor, pushing back against the dwindling rebel forces. In the medical bay, Lyra's body convulsed as Dr. Rossi and Dr. Cross initiated the final stage of the cure synthesis. The Queen's partially transformed DNA acted as a catalyst, binding the compound elements together in a unique pattern. "It's working," Dr. Cross exclaimed, his eyes fixed on the readouts. "The cure is stabilizing," but their elation was short-lived. Lyra's vital signs began to plummet, her body unable to withstand the strain of the process. Alarms blared as her heartbeat became erratic. "We're losing her," Dr. Rossi shouted, her hands moving frantically over the medical equipment. "We need to do something now." Dr. Cross's scales rippled with indecision before he made a choice. "We have to try the DNA reversion. It's risky, but it's our only chance to save her." As they prepared for the procedure, the space battle outside reached its crescendo. The loyalist Saurian ships, bolstered by the cured crew members rejoining the fight, began to overwhelm the rebel vessels. Earth's newly deployed defensive satellites picked off those attempting to flee, their energy beams cutting through the darkness of space. Philip burst into the medical bay, his uniform torn and bloodied from his fight with Zex. His eyes immediately found Lyra, lying pale and still on the medical bed. "What's happening?" he demanded, moving to her side. Dr. Rossi looked up from her work, her face grim. "We've synthesized the cure, but the process has taken a severe toll on her body. We're attempting a partial DNA reversion to stabilize her condition." Philip took Lyra's hand, feeling the weak pulse beneath her skin. "Fight, Lyra," he whispered. "We need you. I need you." As the medical team worked feverishly, the ship's sensors detected a new arrival. A massive Saurian warship dropped out of faster-than-light travel, its presence casting a shadow over the aftermath of the battle. "Captain," a voice called over the comm system. "We're receiving a transmission from the High Council ship. They're demanding to speak with you immediately." Philip looked from Lyra to the expectant faces of the medical team, the weight of command settling heavily on his shoulders. The next few moments would determine the fate of not just Lyra, but the fragile peace between their species. "Tell them I'll be there shortly," he replied, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his heart. He gave Lyra's hand a final squeeze before turning to the medical team. "Do whatever it takes to save her. I'll buy us as much time as I can." As Philip strode out of the medical bay, his mind raced with potential strategies. He knew that the next few hours would test every diplomatic and tactical skill he possessed. The future of human-Saurian relations hung in the balance, and he was determined to see it through, regardless of the cost. Personal cost. With a deep breath, Philip steeled himself for the challenges ahead and strode towards the bridge. As he entered, the view screen dominated by the imposing silhouette of the High Council's warship. Its sleek, predatory line spoke of power and authority, a stark reminder of the delicate balance they now faced. "Open a channel," Philip ordered, his voice steady despite the tension coiling in his gut. This is Captain Philip James of the Earth-Saurian Joint Flagship. We're prepared to receive your delegation. The face that appeared on the screen belonged to Supreme Counselor Draz, his scales a deep, authoritative green. His eyes, vertical slits of amber, narrowed as he regarded Philip. Captain James. Draz's voice rumbled through the speakers. We will board shortly. Prepare your ship for our arrival. As the communication cut off, Philip turned to his crew. Implement Protocol Omega. I want our most trusted officers guarding General Zex and the insurgents. No one gets near them without my direct authorization. He tapped his comm link. DR. Rossi, what's Lyra's status? Elena's voice came through, tinged with exhaustion and worry. She's stable but weak. We're prepping her for potential transport, but I don't recommend moving her unless absolutely necessary. Philip's mind raced, formulating a plan. Understood. Be ready to move her to the observation deck on my signal. And Elena, prepare a presentation on her condition. Focus on the potential benefits. As he ended the call, Philip felt the subtle shift in the ship's gravity as the High Council's vessel docked. He made his way to the airlock, flanked by a mixed honor guard of humans and loyal Saurians. The airlock hissed open, revealing Supreme Counselor Draz and his entourage. The Saurian leader's presence seemed to fill the corridor, his eyes immediately locking on to Philip. Counselor Draz. Philip inclined his head respectfully. Welcome aboard. If you'll follow me, I've arranged for our meeting to take place in the observation deck. As they walked, Philip provided a brief update on the situation, carefully omitting any mention of Lyra's condition. He wanted to control the narrative, to present the information in a way that highlighted the potential benefits rather than the risks. The doors to the observation deck slid open, revealing the breathtaking view of Earth below. The planet's blue and green surface, wreathed in wisps of white clouds, served as a poignant backdrop for the negotiations to come. Philip positioned himself near the center of the room, gesturing for Draz and his delegation to take seats around a large, circular table. As they settled, he tapped his comm link once more. Bring her in, he said softly. Moments later, the doors opened again. Dr. Rossi and Dr. Cross entered, supporting Queen Lyra between them. The collective gasp from the Saurian delegation was audible as they took in her transformed appearance. Lyra's once purely Saurian features now bore unmistakable human characteristics. Her scales had given way to patches of smooth skin, her eyes more rounded, her limbs less sinuous. Yet there was an undeniable grace to her new form, a harmony of two species merged into one. Before Draz could voice his shock, Philip stepped forward. Supreme Counselor, honored delegates. What you see before you is not a mistake or an abomination. It is the key to our future. He nodded to Dr. Rossi, who activated a holographic display above the table. Images of cellular structures and DNA helices flickered into view. Queen Lyra's transformation was a desperate measure to save her life, Philip explained, his voice calm and measured. But in doing so, we've stumbled upon something extraordinary. Dr. Rossi took over, her excitement evident as she detailed their findings. Her Majesty's hybrid DNA exhibits unprecedented healing properties. We're seeing cellular regeneration rates that far exceed anything in our medical records, both human and Saurian. Draz's expression remained stern, but Philip noticed a flicker of interest in his eyes. And what are the risks? The counselor demanded. Have you considered the long-term consequences of this? Mutation? Dr. Cross stepped forward, his scales shifting to a confident blue. We've run extensive simulations, Counselor. While there are still unknowns, the potential benefits far outweigh the risks. This could revolutionize medicine for both our species. As the presentation continued, Philip watched the High Council members closely. He saw the initial shock and disgust give way to curiosity, and in some cases, cautious optimism. Suddenly, an urgent alert sounded. Lieutenant Chen's voice came over the comm system. "Captain, we're receiving an emergency transmission from Earth. The UN Security Council is demanding immediate clarification on the Saurian presence." Philip felt the weight of all eyes in the room upon him. This was the moment that could make or break the fragile peace they'd fought so hard to achieve. "Put it through," he ordered, his mind already formulating a response. As the face of the UN Secretary-General appeared on the monitor, Philip took a deep breath. The next few minutes would determine the course of human-saurian relations for generations to come. He glanced at Lyra, drawing strength from her determined gaze, before turning to address the assembled leaders of two worlds. "Mr. Secretary-General, Supreme Counselor Draz, distinguished delegates," Philip began, his voice steady and clear. "We stand at a crossroads of history." "History," Philip continued, his voice steady and resolute. "The events of the past few days have revealed an unprecedented opportunity for both our species." He gestured towards Lyra, who stood tall despite her weakened state. "Queen Lyra's transformation is not a threat, but a bridge between our worlds. Her unique physiology offers us a chance to revolutionize medicine, to heal wounds that have long divided us." The UN Secretary-General leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "Captain James, while your words are compelling, the sudden appearance of a Saurian warship in Earth orbit has raised serious concerns. We need assurances that this is not the prelude to an invasion." Supreme Counselor Draz's scales rippled with indignation. "An invasion? We came here in response to a crisis involving our own people. If anyone should be concerned about aggression, it is us." Philip raised his hands, a gesture of calm amid the rising tensions. "Gentlemen, please. This is precisely why we need open dialogue. Counselor Draz, would you be willing to allow a human delegation to tour your ship as a show of good faith?" Draz's eyes narrowed, but after a moment's consideration, he nodded. "Agreed, but only if we are granted the same courtesy on your vessel." The Secretary-General seemed to relax slightly. "That seems reasonable. Captain James, can you facilitate this exchange?" "Of course," Philip replied. He tapped his comm link. "Lieutenant Chun, prepare for a Saurian inspection team, and assemble a human delegation to tour the High Council's ship." As the arrangements were made, Dr. Rossi stepped forward. "If I may, there's another matter we should discuss. The cure we synthesized using Queen Lyra's DNA has shown remarkable efficacy. We believe it could have applications beyond the immediate crisis." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. It was Supreme Counselor Draz who broke the silence. "You propose sharing this technology with us?" "Not just sharing," Philip interjected. "Collaboration, a joint research initiative that could benefit both our species." The discussions continued for hours, delving into the intricacies of interspecies cooperation. As the talks progressed, a plan began to take shape. A series of cultural exchanges, scientific missions, and diplomatic visits would pave the way for closer ties between Earth and the Saurian homeworld. As the meeting drew to a close, the Secretary-General turned to Philip. "Captain James, your handling of this crisis has been exemplary. We'll need someone to oversee these initiatives moving forward. Someone who understands both sides." Philip felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. "I'm honored, sir, but I can't do it alone." He glanced at Lyra, their eyes meeting in silent understanding. "Of course," the Secretary-General nodded. "Queen Lyra's participation would be invaluable. But first, we need to make this official. I propose we convene a full assembly of the United Nations, with representatives from the Saurian High Council in attendance." Counselor Draz's scales shifted to a deep blue, a sign of agreement in Saurian culture. "A wise suggestion. We shall inform our people and prepare for this historic moment." As the delegates filed out of the room, Philip approached Lyra. "How are you holding up?" he asked softly. Lyra's lips curved in a smile that was both familiar and alien. "I'm managing this new form. It's strange, but not unpleasant. I feel as though I can bridge the gap between our peoples in a way I never could before." Philip nodded, acutely aware of the connection between them. "We have a long road ahead of us. Are you ready for this?" "Together," Lyra replied, her hand finding his. "I believe we can accomplish anything." The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. As news of the impending assembly spread, the world watched with a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. Security measures were tightened around the globe, with particular emphasis on New York City. The day of the assembly dawned clear and bright. The Saurian flagship, escorted by a mixed fleet of human and Saurian vessels, began its descent through Earth's atmosphere. From the observation deck, Philip watched as the blue-green orb of his homeworld grew larger. Beside him, Lyra stood transfixed by the view. Her scales shimmered with an iridescent quality that seemed to reflect the planet's colors. "It's beautiful," she whispered. As they entered the lower atmosphere, Philip could see the sprawling cityscape of New York come into view. The ship touched down in a specially prepared area outside the United Nations headquarters. A massive security perimeter had been established, with both human and Saurian forces working in tandem. Philip took a deep breath, straightening his uniform. "Are you ready?" he asked Lyra. She nodded, her posture regal despite the lingering effects of her transformation. "Let's make history." The main hatch of the ship opened with a hiss of equalizing pressure. Philip stepped out first, blinking in the bright sunlight. He turned, extending his hand to Lyra. As she emerged, a collective gasp rose from the assembled crowd. Lyra's appearance was striking. Her scales caught the light, creating a dazzling display of color. Yet there was an unmistakably human quality to her movements, a fluidity that spoke of her unique nature. Supreme Counselor Draz and his delegation followed, their expressions a mix of caution and curiosity as they took in their surroundings. Philip could see the discomfort in their postures, and used Earth's gravity and atmosphere. As they made their way towards the United Nations building, a commotion erupted from the edges of the crowd. A group of protesters had broken through the outer security perimeter, their angry shouts cutting through the air. "Go back to your own planet. Earth for humans." The slogans were harsh, filled with fear and mistrust. Philip tensed, ready to intervene, but before he could act, Lyra stepped forward. Her voice, enhanced by her transformation, carried clearly over the din. "People of Earth," she began, her words tinged with a musical quality that seemed to captivate the listeners. "We come not as conquerors, but as friends. Our differences are many, but our desires are the same. Peace, progress, a future for our children." The protesters fell silent, their anger giving way to curiosity. Lyra continued, her words weaving a vision of cooperation and mutual understanding. Philip watched in amazement as the crowd's mood shifted, hostility replaced by cautious optimism. As Lyra finished speaking, applause broke out, spreading through the crowd like a wave. Philip caught sight of a familiar face in the sea of people. Dr. Elena Rossi stood near the front, her expression one of pride and wonder. Philip quickly conferred with the security team, arranging for Dr. Rossi to join them. Her expertise would be invaluable in the discussions to come. As they entered the United Nations building, Philip felt a sense of anticipation building. The Grand Assembly Hall had been modified to accommodate the Saurian delegates, with environmental controls adjusted to mimic conditions on their homeworld. The Secretary-General greeted them at the entrance, his face solemn yet hopeful. "Captain James Queen Lyra, Supreme Counselor Draz. Welcome. The world is watching. Let us show them what can be achieved when we work together." Philip nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. As they prepared to enter the assembly hall, he knew that the real challenge was just beginning. The future of two worlds hung in the balance, and every word, every decision would shape the path ahead. With a shared glance of tenacity, Philip and Lyra stepped forward, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The doors to the assembly hall swung open, revealing a sea of faces from every corner of the earth, all waiting to witness the dawn of a new era in human-saurian relations. The doors to the assembly hall swung open, revealing a sea of faces from every corner of the earth, all waiting to witness the dawn of a new era in human-saurian cooperation. As Philip and Lyra stepped into the hall, a hush fell over the assembly. The air crackled with tension and anticipation. Philip felt Lyra's hand tighten around his, her scales cool against his skin. They made their way to the center of the room, where a podium awaited them. Before Philip could speak, an aide rushed forward, whispering urgently in his ear, "Captain James, there's been a development. The Security Council is convening an emergency session. Your presence is required immediately." Philip nodded, turning to address the assembly. "Esteemed delegates, I apologize, but we must postpone this meeting. An urgent matter requires our attention." Murmurs of confusion rippled through the crowd as Philip and Lyra were escorted out of the hall. They hurried through the corridors of the United Nations building, their footsteps echoing off the marble floors. "What's happening?" Lyra asked, her voice low and tense. "I'm not sure," Philip replied, his mind racing. "But whatever it is, it's big enough to interrupt the assembly." They entered the Security Council chamber, finding it already packed with delegates and advisors. The Secretary General motioned for them to take seats at the main table. "Captain James, Queen Lyra," he began, his voice grave. "We've called this emergency session to discuss the implications of recent events. Specifically, the proposal for a permanent human-saurian liaison office." Philip leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "I thought that proposal was well received. What's changed?" A stern-faced woman Philip recognized as the Russian ambassador spoke up. "The proposal itself is not the issue, Captain. It's the potential consequences that concern us." The discussion that followed was intense and wide-ranging. Delegates debated the merits and risks of closer ties with the Saurians, their voices rising and falling as arguments were made and countered. As the debate raged on, Dr. Elena Rossi was called to testify. She stepped up to the podium, her eyes bright with excitement despite the tense atmosphere. "Distinguished council members," she began, "I'm here to present our findings on Queen Lyra's unique physiology. Our research has revealed that her transformed DNA holds incredible potential for medical advancements." The room fell silent as Dr. Rossi detailed her findings. She explained how Lyra's ability to adapt to Earth's environment while retaining saurian characteristics could pave the way for groundbreaking treatments for human diseases and even enhance physical capabilities. The revelation sent shockwaves through the council. Some members leaned forward, their eyes alight with interest, while others sat back, their expressions clouded with concern. "This is unprecedented," the Chinese ambassador declared. "The potential benefits are enormous, but so are the risks. How can we ensure this technology won't be misused?" Before anyone could respond, a holographic projection flickered to life in the center of the room. Supreme Counselor Draz's imposing figure appeared, his scales shifting in agitation. "Esteemed members of the Security Council," Draz began, his voice resonating through the chamber, "we understand your concerns. That is why I propose a limited exchange program. Allow a small number of humans to undergo a similar transformation process. This will foster greater understanding between our species and allow for more comprehensive research." The council chamber erupted into chaos. Delegates shouted over one another, some supporting the idea, others vehemently opposing it. Philip watched as the carefully constructed bridge between their species threatened to collapse under the weight of fear and mistrust. He stood, raising his hands for silence. The room gradually quieted, all eyes turning to him. "Ladies and gentlemen," Philip said, his voice steady and clear, "I understand the concerns on both sides. What Supreme Counselor Draz proposes is radical and not without risk. But we cannot let fear dictate our actions. I propose a phased approach to cooperation. Let's start with joint scientific research projects and cultural exchanges. We can build trust and understanding before considering any biological modifications." His words seemed to calm the turbulent atmosphere. The delegates began nodding, murmuring among themselves. Even Draz's holographic form appeared thoughtful. As discussions continued, an aide approached Philip and Lyra. "Captain, Your Majesty," he said quietly, "we need to move you to a secure location. The situation outside is becoming volatile." Philip glanced at Lyra, who nodded her agreement. They slipped out of the chamber, following the aide through a series of back corridors. Through the windows, Philip caught glimpses of the crowds gathering outside the UN building. Some held signs welcoming the Saurians, while others brandished banners with anti-alien slogans. They were led to a fortified room deep within the building. As the door sealed behind them, Philip felt the tension he'd been holding begin to uncoil. He turned to Lyra, seeing his own mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration mirrored in her eyes. "Well," he said with a wry smile, "that was quite a first day of diplomacy." Lyra laughed, the sound both familiar and alien. "Indeed, I fear we've opened a Pandora's box with Dr. Rossi's revelation." Philip stepped closer, drawn by some inexplicable force. "Yoro, e." His words were cut off by a sudden, blaring alarm. A screen on the wall flickered to life, displaying an urgent message from the Saurian flagship. Philip's blood ran cold as he read the words. "General Zex has escaped custody. He's stolen a scout ship and is headed for Earth. Intentions unknown. Exercise extreme caution." He turned to Lyra, seeing the same perseverance in her eyes that he felt coursing through him. Without a word, they both knew what they had to do. The fate of human-Saurian relations now rested on their ability to stop Zex before he could undo everything they had worked for. Philip reached for the communication panel, his mind already formulating a plan. "This is Captain James. We need immediate transport to the nearest space-capable vessel. And get me a direct line to Earth's defense systems. We've got a rogue Saurian to catch." Philip's fingers flew over the communication panel, his voice taut with urgency. "This is Captain James requesting immediate clearance for launch. We have a code red situation." Within moments, they were escorted to a high-speed shuttle. As they strapped themselves in, Lyra's scales shimmered with tension. "How did Zex escape?" she asked, her voice a low hiss of frustration. Philip shook his head, focusing on the pre-flight checks. "We'll get answers later. Right now, we need to stop him before he reaches Earth." The shuttle shot into the sky, breaking through the atmosphere with a bone-rattling roar. As they entered the inky blackness of space, Philip's hands danced over the controls, plotting an intercept course. "There," Lyra said, pointing to a blip on the radar. "That must be Zex's stolen scout ship." Philip nodded, pushing the engines to their limits. The stars blurred into streaks of light as they gave chase, closing the distance rapidly. Suddenly, Zex's ship veered sharply, diving into a dense asteroid field. Philip gritted his teeth, following the rogue general into the treacherous maze of space rocks. "Hold on," he warned Lyra, his eyes scanning the field ahead. "This is going to get rough." The shuttle jerked and weaved as Philip navigated through the asteroid field, relying on his years of experience and lightning-fast reflexes. Lyra's enhanced senses proved invaluable, her voice guiding him through the chaos. "Left. Now right. Watch out for that cluster at 2 o'clock. Despite their efforts, Zex's smaller ship maintained its lead, using the asteroids for cover. Philip's frustration mounted as they lost visual contact several times, only to pick up the trail again moments later. "We can't keep this up forever," Lyra said, her eyes never leaving the sensors. "We need to end this chase soon." As if in response to her words, their sensors detected a massive energy surge from Zex's ship. Philip's blood ran cold as he realized the implications. "He's going to detonate the explosive," he muttered, his mind racing for a solution. In a split-second decision, Philip cut the main engines, activating a series of short-range thrusters instead. The sudden change in momentum made Lyra gasp, but Philip's gambit paid off. The precise movements allowed them to weave between the asteroids with greater agility, closing the gap between them and Zex. "There!" Lyra exclaimed, pointing to a large asteroid. "He's trying to hide behind it." Philip didn't hesitate. He fired the thrusters, sending their shuttle on a curved trajectory around the space rock. As they emerged on the other side, they found themselves face to face with Zex's ship, cutting off his escape route. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, without warning, Zex opened fire. Energy beams lanced out from his ship, forcing Philip into a series of evasive maneuvers. "Lyra, take the weapons!" Philip shouted, his entire focus on keeping them alive amidst the barrage. Lyra's hands moved with preternatural speed, returning fire with precision. A stray shot from Zex's ship struck a nearby asteroid, causing it to shatter into thousands of fragments. The debris field expanded rapidly, threatening both vessels. Philip's world narrowed to the viewport and his controls. He pushed the shuttle to its limits, threading through gaps barely wider than their ship, banking and rolling to avoid the deadly fragments. Beside him, Lyra managed to land a critical hit on Zex's engines. The rogue general's ship lurched, its maneuverability severely compromised. Seeing his advantage slipping away, Zex made a desperate move. He aimed his crippled ship towards a particularly dense cluster of asteroids and accelerated to full speed. "He's trying to lose us in there," Lyra said, her voice tight with tension. Philip nodded grimly. Two can play at that game. He matched Zex's trajectory but kept their speed in check, unwilling to risk a collision in the chaotic environment ahead. As they entered the asteroid cluster, visibility dropped to near zero. Philip relied on Lyra's enhanced vision and the shuttle sensors to navigate the treacherous path. "Wait," Lyra said suddenly, her eyes narrowing. "Do you see that?" Philip followed her gaze, spotting an unusual formation on one of the larger asteroids. As they drew closer, the true nature of the anomaly became clear. It was an artificial structure almost entirely hidden within the rock. An old mining outpost, Philip realized, watching as Zex's ship disappeared into a concealed hangar bay. "He's been leading us here all along." They approached cautiously, scanning the facility. The outpost's life support systems were active, suggesting recent use. "We can't let him escape," Lyra said, her voice filled with purpose. "And we certainly can't risk him detonating that explosive here." Philip nodded, maneuvering their shuttle towards a docking port. "Agreed. We'll have to go in after him." As they prepared for the confrontation, Lyra sent an encrypted message to Earth and the Saurian fleet, updating them on the situation and their location. The close quarters of the shuttle and the intensity of the moment led to an unexpected pause. Philip and Lyra's eyes met, a silent understanding passing between them. Their hands brushed together, the contact brief but charged with unspoken emotion. Pushing aside the distracting thoughts, they armed themselves with weapons that melded human and Saurian technology. With a shared nod of readiness, they exited their shuttle and entered the abandoned outpost, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead in the dim, mysterious corridors of the ancient facility. Mining facility. The air was stale and cold, carrying the faint scent of long-abandoned machinery and metal. Philip and Lyra moved cautiously through the dimly lit corridors, their footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. They communicated in hushed tones, strategizing their next move. "We should split up," Philip suggested. "Cover more ground. Find Zex faster." Lyra nodded, her scales shimmering in the low light. "Agreed. I'll take the upper levels, you check below. Stay in constant communication." With a shared look of purpose, they parted ways. Philip descended into the lower levels of the facility, his hybrid eyes adjusting quickly to the darkness. He found himself in a room filled with outdated Earth computer terminals, most of them dark and lifeless. One terminal, however, emitted a faint glow. Philip approached it, his fingers dancing over the dusty keyboard. Years of experience as a starship captain had honed his technical skills, and he soon found himself deep in the outpost systems. "Lyra," he whispered into his communicator, "I've accessed the facility's network. Give me a moment, and I should have eyes everywhere." Meanwhile, Lyra prowled to the upper levels, her enhanced senses on high alert. She pushed open a heavy door and found herself in what appeared to be a makeshift laboratory. The room was cluttered with equipment, both human and saurian in origin. As she examined the scattered notes and diagrams, her blood ran cold. "Philip," she hissed into her communicator, "Zex has created some kind of hybrid weapon. It's worse than we thought." Philip's voice crackled back, tense with concern. "How bad?" "He's combined saurian energy tech with human nuclear materials. The blast potential is catastrophic. And there's more. I'm picking up an energy signature in the walls. I think..." "It's a detonation network," Philip finished, his eyes scanning the security feeds he'd just accessed. "I see it now. The explosives are rigged throughout the entire asteroid." Lyra's voice was grim. "If this goes off, it won't just destroy the asteroid. The electromagnetic pulse could disable Earth's defenses, leave them vulnerable." As they processed this information, a new threat emerged. The air around them seemed to thin, making breathing more labored. "Philip, are you feeling this?" Lyra asked, her breaths coming faster. "Yeah," he replied, his own voice strained. "Oxygen levels are dropping. Zex must be manipulating the life support systems." They realized the gravity of their situation. Their hybrid physiologies gave them an advantage, but time was still against them. They needed to act fast. Philip's fingers flew over the keyboard, initiating a facility-wide scan to map the explosive network. "Lyra, I've got Zex's location. He's in a fortified control room on the top level. We need a plan." Lyra's mind raced, formulating a strategy. "I can reach him from the outside. There's an access shaft I can climb. You keep him distracted." "Understood," Philip replied, already patching into the outpost communication system. "Be careful out there." As Lyra made her way to the exterior airlock, Philip took a deep breath and opened a channel to the control room. "General Zex," he called out, his voice steady despite the thinning air. "This is Captain James. Let's talk." Zex's voice came back, filled with contempt. "There's nothing to discuss, traitor. You've made your choice, siding with the humans." As Philip engaged Zex in verbal combat, buying time and gathering information, Lyra began her perilous climb up the asteroid's central shaft. The void of space surrounded her, the stars cold and indifferent witnesses to her struggle. Inside, Philip fought against his blurring vision, pushing his hybrid body to its limits as he worked to create a software override for the detonation system. Alarms blared and environmental controls fluctuated as he used the outpost systems to keep Zex off balance. Lyra reached the exterior hatch of the control room just as Philip's voice came through her communicator. "Override's ready. On your mark." She took a deep breath, bracing herself. "Now!" In a coordinated strike, Lyra breached the control room as Philip initiated the override. "Zex, caught off guard, spun to face the intruder. For a moment, time seemed to stand still as Lyra and Zex locked eyes. Then, chaos erupted. Lyra launched herself at Zex, her enhanced strength meeting his military training in a brutal clash. They grappled fiercely, neither able to gain the upper hand. In a desperate move, Zex managed to reach the control panel. His hand slammed down on a large red button, and a new alarm filled the air. Manual override engaged, an automated voice announced. Detonation sequence initiated. Lyra's heart raced as she realized the dire implications. She redoubled her efforts, finally managing to pin Zex to the ground just as Philip burst into the control room, his face flushed from his sprint from the lower levels. Their eyes met briefly, a moment of shared relief and willpower passing between them. But the blaring alarms quickly brought them back to the urgency of their situation. "We need to go now," Philip shouted over the din, already moving to secure the semi-conscious Zex. Together, they dragged the defeated general through the shaking corridors of the asteroid base. The structure groaned around them, the first explosive charges beginning to detonate in sequence. They reached their ship with seconds to spare, the docking clamps releasing just as the first major tremors rocked the asteroid. Philip threw himself into the pilot's seat, his hands flying over the controls as Lyra secured their prisoner. The ship accelerated away from the doomed outpost, pushing Philip and Lyra back into their seats. Through the viewport, they watched as the asteroid erupted in a spectacular explosion, the hybrid energy nuclear blast creating a shockwave that buffeted their vessel. As the turbulence subsided, an uneasy silence fell over the ship's cabin. Philip and Lyra exchanged a long look, the weight of their narrow escape and the implications of Zex's actions settling over them. With Earth growing larger in their viewport, they knew that the real challenges were just beginning. The incident in the asteroid field had raised the stakes dramatically, and the fragile peace between humans and saurians hung in the balance. Philip set the ship on an approach vector for Earth, his mind already racing with the complexities of the political storm they were about to face. Beside him, Lyra stood watch over their captive, her expression a mixture of relief and concern. As they prepared for re-entry, both Philip and Lyra knew that their partnership, professional and personal, would be tested like never before in the coming days. The future of two species now rested, in part, on their shoulders. As they entered Earth's atmosphere, the comm system crackled to life with an urgent transmission from the United Nations Security Council. "Captain James, Lieutenant Lyra, this is UNSC Control. We've detected a massive explosion in the asteroid field. Earth is in a state of panic. You are ordered to land immediately at Secure Facility Alpha for debriefing. Acknowledge." Philip exchanged a quick glance with Lyra before responding. "Acknowledge, UNSC Control. Adjusting course now." The ship's descent was tense, the silence broken only by the occasional groan from their restrained prisoner. As they approached the high-security military base, Philip could see a flurry of activity on the ground. Armed personnel, emergency vehicles, and a crowd of officials waiting anxiously. The moment they touched down, a team of heavily armed guards surrounded the ship. Philip and Lyra were ushered out first, followed by two burly officers dragging a semi-conscious Zex between them. "This way, quickly," barked a stern-faced woman in a crisp military uniform. She led them through a maze of corridors to a stark interrogation room. For hours, Philip and Lyra endured intense questioning about the events in the asteroid field. They recounted every detail: Zex's weapon, the chase, the explosion, while a team of experts analyzed their ship's data logs. The weapon's potential. "It's beyond anything we've seen," Lyra explained, her voice tight with concern. If it had detonated as intended, the results would have been catastrophic. As the debriefing stretched on, Dr. Elena Rossi and Dr. Cross arrived to conduct medical examinations. Philip watched as Lyra underwent her scan first, noting the look of surprise that crossed Dr. Rossi's face. Fascinating, Dr. Rossi murmured, studying the results. Lyra, your transformation has accelerated significantly. Your DNA structure is showing remarkable adaptation. When it was Philip's turn, he felt a strange tingling sensation as the scanner passed over him. Dr. Kraw's eyes widened as he examined the readout. Captain James, he said slowly, your genetic makeup is changing. We're detecting the incorporation of saurian DNA sequences. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Philip felt a mix of shock and curiosity, while Lyra looked at him with a new intensity in her gaze. Their moment of contemplation was interrupted by the arrival of Supreme Counselor Draz. The saurian leader's presence filled the room, his piercing eyes taking in every detail. Captain James, Draz said, his voice a low rumble. Your genetic changes are most intriguing. Perhaps we should discuss the potential applications of such a development. Before Philip could respond, alarms blared throughout the facility. A harried officer burst into the room. Sirs, we have a situation, he reported breathlessly. News of the asteroid incident and General Zex's capture has leaked. Protests are erupting in major cities worldwide. Anti-saurian sentiment is spreading rapidly. Draz's expression darkened. This is precisely the kind of reaction we sought to avoid. We must address this immediately. As if on cue, a holographic display flickered to life, showing chaotic scenes from around the globe. Crowds of humans marched through streets, carrying signs with slogans like, Earth for humans and no more aliens. Philip felt a pit forming in his stomach. The fragile peace they had worked so hard to build was threatening to unravel before their eyes. We need a unified response, Lyra said, stepping forward. Something to show both humans and saurians that we're stronger together than apart. A UN representative nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps. A joint task force? To investigate the long-term effects of human-saurian genetic hybridization? With all due respect, Philip interjected, we need to act now. Every moment we delay gives fear and misinformation more time to spread. Draz fixed his gaze on Philip and Lyra. You two have unique insight into the situation. Your experiences, your very biology, bridge our two species. I propose you lead this task force. Before they could respond, the door burst open again. A breathless aide rushed in, clutching a datapad. Sirs, we've just received reports of unauthorized genetic experiments, the aide reported. A group of human scientists. They're attempting to enhance human capabilities using saurian DNA. The room erupted into chaos as officials argued about how to proceed. Amidst the commotion, Philip felt Lyra's hand slip into his. Their eyes met, a silent understanding passing between them. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. As the noise of the room faded into the background, Philip and Lyra steeled themselves for the next phase of their mission, one that would test not only their skills, but the very nature of their evolving identities. The weight of their responsibilities settled heavily upon them as they contemplated their next move. We need more information, Philip said, his voice low and determined. There's someone we should talk to, an old contact of mine who might have insight into these genetic experiments. Lyra nodded, her eyes scanning the room for potential eavesdroppers. How do we reach out without alerting the authorities? Philip pulled out a small, encrypted communicator. I have a secure channel. We'll need to be careful, though. Both human and saurian intelligence agencies will be watching our every move. As they prepared to leave the facility, Philip and Lyra took extra precautions to avoid detection. They borrowed nondescript clothing from the base's storage and used their hybrid physiologies to alter their appearances slightly. Lyra's skin took on a more human hue, while Philip's eyes shifted to a saurian-like green. They slipped out of the compound during a shift change, blending in with the departing personnel. Once clear, they made their way to a busy transit hub where Philip used his encrypted device to arrange transportation to their meeting point. Hours later, they found themselves approaching a dilapidated warehouse on the outskirts of a small coastal town. The salty air and the distant cry of seagulls created an eerie atmosphere as they cautiously entered the building. "Dr. Henderson?" Philip called out, his voice echoing in the empty space. A figure emerged from the shadows, revealing a man with graying hair and tired eyes. "Captain James, Lieutenant Lyra," he greeted them. "I'm glad you made it. Dr. Marcus Henderson, once a leading geneticist in human-saurian joint research projects, now looked like a man haunted by his own discoveries." He led them to a makeshift workspace hidden behind stacks of old crates. "What I'm about to show you," Henderson began, his fingers flying over a holographic keyboard, "will change everything you thought you knew about the current situation." A series of complex genetic sequences appeared in the air before them. Lyra leaned in, her scientific background allowing her to grasp the implications quickly. This can't be right," she murmured, her eyes widening. Henderson nodded grimly. "I'm afraid it is. General Zex's weapon wasn't just a one-off creation. It was part of a much larger plan to forcibly hybridize both human and saurian populations on a massive scale." Philip felt a chill run down his spine. "Who's behind this?" "A clandestine group of human and saurian scientists," Henderson explained. "They believe that widespread genetic mixing is the key to long-term peace between our species. They're operating in secret labs all over the globe." As they discussed the ramifications of this revelation, a sudden noise outside the warehouse caught their attention. Philip moved to the window, his enhanced vision allowing him to pierce the darkness outside. "We've got company," he hissed. "Joint Human-Saurian Task Force. They've surrounded the building." Lyra's mind raced. How did they find us? Before anyone could answer, a voice boomed through a loudspeaker. "This is Commander John Hayes of the Human-Saurian Joint Security Force. We have you surrounded. Come out with your hands up." Philip and Lyra exchanged a quick glance, years of working together allowing them to formulate a plan without words. Lyra darted to the warehouse's electrical panel, her fingers moving with inhuman speed to override the system. In an instant, the building was plunged into darkness. Philip used the confusion to create an escape route, his saurian-enhanced strength allowing him to punch through a weak point in the wall. As they prepared to flee, a stun blast cut through the air, catching Dr. Henderson in the chest. The scientist crumpled to the ground, the data drive containing his research clattering across the floor. "We can't leave him," Lyra cried, moving to help the fallen doctor. Philip grabbed her arm, his voice urgent. "We have no choice. If we're captured, all of this will be for nothing." With heavy hearts, they scooped up the data drive and slipped through the opening Philip had created. The cool night air hit them as they sprinted into the nearby forest, the sounds of pursuit not far behind. They ran for what felt like hours, their hybrid physiology allowing them to push beyond normal human limits. As dawn began to break, they stumbled upon an old, overgrown bunker half buried in the forest floor. "In here," Philip gasped, pulling aside the rusted door. Inside, they found a relic of a forgotten era, outdated but still functional equipment lining the walls. As they caught their breath, Lyra inserted the data drive into a compatible port. "We need to analyze this data," she said, her fingers flying over the ancient keyboard. "It might be our only chance to understand the full scope of what we're dealing with." As the information scrolled across the screen, Philip and Lyra's worst fears were confirmed. The genetic modification experiments were far more widespread than they had imagined, with test subjects in multiple locations around the globe. The gravity of the situation, combined with the close quarters of the bunker, brought their growing feelings for each other to the surface. Their eyes met, And in that moment, all the tension and unspoken emotions between them crystallized. Philip reached out, gently cupping Lyra's face. She leaned into his touch, and their lips met in a passionate kiss. For a brief, beautiful moment, the weight of their mission faded away, leaving only their connection. Their intimate moment was shattered by a harsh beeping from the bunker's perimeter sensors. The display showed multiple heat signatures converging on their location. "They've tracked us here," Lyra said, her voice tight with tension. Philip nodded, his mind already formulating a plan. "We need to get this information out. It's bigger than us now." Using the bunker's old communication equipment, they established a secure connection with a trusted contact at the United Nations. As they transmitted a portion of Dr. Henderson's data along with an explanation of their situation, they could hear the Special Forces team beginning to breach the bunker's outer defenses. "We've done what we can," Philip said, grabbing Lyra's hand. "Now we need to move." They slipped into an emergency tunnel that led away from the bunker, emerging in a hidden cove where an old boat sat moored to a dilapidated dock. As they prepared the vessel for a hasty departure, they heard voices approaching from the forest. Commander Hayes and a Saurian officer they recognized as Security Chief Kala burst from the tree-line, weapons raised. "Stop right there," Hayes shouted. "You're under arrest." Philip and Lyra paused at the boat's edge, caught between their duty and the truth they had uncovered. The gentle lapping of waves against the shore filled the tense silence as both sides considered their next move. Move. Philip's mind raced, calculating their options. The boat offered a slim chance of escape, but it would leave them exposed on the open water. He glanced at Lyra, seeing the same realization in her eyes. "We can't outrun them in that," Lyra said, gesturing to the small vessel. Philip nodded, scanning the horizon. His enhanced vision caught sight of something in the distance, a large cargo ship cutting through the waves. "There," he said, pointing. "Our ticket out of here." Without hesitation, they plunged into the water, their hybrid physiology allowing them to swim with incredible speed and endurance. The shouts of Hayes and Kala faded behind them as they struck out for the ship. As they approached the massive vessel, Philip and Lyra used their enhanced strength to scale the hull, finding handholds where none should exist. They pulled themselves onto the deck, quickly ducking behind a stack of shipping containers to avoid detection by the crew. Catching their breath, Philip pulled out the data drive. "We need to examine this more closely," he said, his voice low. Lyra nodded, producing a small, portable device from a waterproof pouch. They carefully inserted the drive and began sifting through the information. "Look at this," Lyra whispered, her eyes widening. "Coordinates for genetic modification facilities around the world." Philip leaned in, his brow furrowing as he studied the data. "There's one in the South Pacific, an island facility." Their eyes met, a silent understanding passing between them. "We need to investigate," Lyra said. As the ship sailed on, Philip and Lyra found themselves in close quarters, hidden among the containers. The constant proximity and shared danger brought their feelings to the surface. In quiet moments between analyzing data and planning their next move, they found solace in each other's arms. One night, as they lay together in the shadow of a container, Lyra traced the subtle saurian markings that had begun to appear on Philip's skin. "What does this mean for us?" she asked softly. "For humans and saurians?" Philip took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "I don't know," he admitted. "But whatever happens, we face it together." Days passed, and the ship docked at a bustling port city. Philip and Lyra slipped off the vessel unnoticed, blending into the crowd with practiced ease. They made their way to a small internet cafe, where they used encrypted channels to reach out to Dr. Elena Rossi and Dr. Cross. "We need to meet," Philip typed. "We have information that changes everything." The response came quickly. Coordinates for a secure location appeared on the screen. As they left the cafe, Lyra's enhanced senses picked up on something. "We're being followed," she murmured. Philip nodded imperceptibly. "I see them. 3 o'clock, 2 men in dark jackets." They moved casually through the crowded streets, their pursuers keeping pace. Suddenly, Lyra grabbed Philip's hand and pulled him into a narrow alley. They broke into a run, their hybrid speed giving them an edge. The chase led them through a maze of back streets and crowded marketplaces. Philip and Lyra used their abilities to leap over obstacles and squeeze through gaps too small for their pursuers. Finally, they found themselves at an abandoned warehouse on the city's outskirts. Panting slightly, they slipped inside, alert for any signs of danger. To their surprise, they found not only Dr. Rossi and Dr. Cross waiting for them, but also a small group of human and saurian scientists. Among them stood a woman who bore a striking resemblance to Dr. Marcus Henderson. "I'm Dr. Ava Henderson," she said, stepping forward. "Marcus's sister. We've been continuing his work since his capture." Philip and Lyra exchanged glances before Philip spoke. "What have you discovered?" Dr. Ava Henderson's expression grew grave. "The experiments have progressed further than we imagined. They're not just modifying existing humans and saurians. They're creating true hybrids." She activated a holographic display, showing images of beings that were neither fully human nor saurian. These hybrids possess abilities that surpass both species. Strength, speed, intelligence, they're off the charts. The room erupted into discussion. Some argued for immediately releasing the information to the public, while others cautioned against acting without more evidence. Philip raised his voice above the commotion. "We need to investigate the island facility. See for ourselves what's happening there." As the group debated their next move, a loud bang echoed through the warehouse. Security forces had surrounded the building. "We've been compromised," Dr. Cross hissed. Philip and Lyra sprang into action. Using their enhanced strength, they toppled a stack of crates, creating a barrier between the group and the entrance. "There's a tunnel," Dr. Rossi shouted, pointing to a hidden trapdoor. "It leads out of the city." As the scientists scrambled for the escape route, Philip and Lyra positioned themselves to hold off the intruders. The warehouse door buckled under the assault of the security forces. "Go!" Philip shouted to the others. "We'll create a diversion." In the chaos that followed, Philip and Lyra fought with a synchronicity born of their shared experiences and evolving biology. They moved as one, their hybrid abilities allowing them to hold their own against the overwhelming force. But as the last of the scientists disappeared into the tunnel, Philip and Lyra found themselves cut off from the escape route. They retreated deeper into the warehouse, the sounds of pursuit growing closer. "Up there," Lyra said, pointing to a maintenance shaft leading to the roof. They climbed swiftly, emerging onto the rooftop just as their pursuers breached the last door below. Philip and Lyra stood at the edge, surveying the city spread out before them. In the distance, a nearby building sported a helipad, a potential means of escape. Sirens wailed in the night, and searchlights swept across the area. Philip turned to Lyra, his expression determined. "Ready for another leap of faith?" Lyra's hand found his, squeezing tightly. "Always." As the rooftop access door began to open behind them, Philip and Lyra tensed, preparing to make their daring jump to the adjacent building. The truth about the genetic modification network lay within their grasp, but the path to uncover it had never been more perilous. Perilous, with a shared nod of understanding, they launched themselves into the air. The gap between buildings yawned beneath them, a chasm of certain death for ordinary humans. But Philip and Lyra were far from ordinary. Their enhanced muscles propelled them through the air with impossible grace, their hybrid physiology allowing them to soar across the divide. They landed on the adjacent rooftop with cat-like precision, the impact barely registering in their augmented bodies. Without missing a beat, they sprinted towards the waiting helicopter, the sound of pursuit growing fainter behind them. Philip's hands flew over the aircraft's controls, muscle memory from his military training kicking in as he hot-wired the machine. The rotor blades whirred to life, drowning out the wail of approaching sirens. "Hold on," he shouted to Lyra as she climbed into the co-pilot seat. The helicopter lifted off just as the rooftop door burst open, security forces spilling out with weapons raised. Searchlights swept across the sky, but Philip's skilled maneuvering kept them just out of reach. As the city lights faded behind them, Lyra pulled out the navigation system. "The coordinates from Dr. Henderson's data," she said, inputting the location. "It's an island in the South Pacific." Philip nodded, setting their course. "It's going to be a long flight. We'll need to take shifts." Hours blurred together as they flew over vast stretches of ocean. When not at the controls, they took turns resting, their bodies pushed to the limits of endurance. The gentle hum of the rotors and the vast expanse of stars above provided a surreal backdrop to their journey. As dawn broke on the horizon, the weather began to change. Dark clouds gathered, and the helicopter was soon buffeted by strong winds. Rain lashed against the windshield, reducing visibility to near zero. "We're getting close to the coordinates," Lyra shouted over the howling wind. "But this storm is going to make landing nearly impossible." Philip's lips pursed as he fought to keep the aircraft steady. "We don't have a choice. We're almost out of fuel." Through gaps in the clouds, they caught glimpses of a small landmass below. The island was a dark smudge against the turbulent sea, hidden from conventional detection methods. "There," Lyra pointed to a narrow strip of beach. "It's our only chance." Philip guided the helicopter down, fighting against crosswinds that threatened to dash them against the rocks. The skids hit the sand hard, the impact jarring them in their seats. As the rotor blades slowed, they quickly exited the aircraft, acutely aware that it might be their only means of escape. Rain pelted their faces as they made for the dense jungle at the edge of the beach. Lyra's enhanced senses picked up something artificial among the natural growth. Philip looked. She pointed to a barely visible seam in what appeared to be solid rock. Using her saurian strength, Lyra pried open the hidden entrance. A dimly lit corridor stretched before them, descending into the earth. They shared a glance, steeling themselves for what lay ahead, and entered the facility. The interior was a marvel of technology, a seamless blend of human and saurian design. They moved silently through a maze of laboratories and containment areas, documenting everything with a compact camera they had brought from the helicopter. In a massive chamber, they discovered rows upon rows of stasis pods. Each pod contained a being that was neither fully human nor saurian, but a perfect blend of both. Philip and Lyra stood in awe of the hybrid creatures, the living embodiments of the genetic modification program they had been fighting to expose. Suddenly, an alarm blared through the facility. Red lights flashed, and the hum of activating defense systems filled the air. Laser grids sprung to life in the corridors, and the whir of security drones echoed through the chambers. "We've been detected," Philip said, grabbing Lyra's hand. "We need to move." They sprinted through the facility, their hybrid abilities allowing them to evade capture. They leapt over laser grids, their enhanced reflexes guiding them through gaps that would have spelled certain capture for ordinary infiltrators. As they rounded a corner, they encountered a group of scientists frantically trying to secure data. In the ensuing struggle, Philip and Lyra managed to subdue them and gain access to the central computer system. "Cover me," Philip said as his fingers flew over the keyboard, downloading critical information about the hybrid program. Lyra stood guard, her enhanced senses on high alert. "Hurry," she urged. "We've got company coming." With the data secured, they made a desperate dash for the exit. They emerged into the storm, now pursued by armed guards. The beach where they had left the helicopter seemed miles away as they sprinted through the driving rain. Reaching the shoreline, their hearts sank. The helicopter was surrounded by security personnel, their escape route cut off. Without hesitation, Philip and Lyra plunged into the turbulent ocean, their hybrid physiology allowing them to withstand the punishing waves. They swam out to sea, the storm providing cover from their pursuers. As exhaustion began to set in, Lyra spotted a small fishing boat being tossed by the waves. With their last reserves of strength, they climbed aboard the unmanned vessel. In the boat's tiny cabin, they huddled together, soaked and battered but alive. Philip used the rudimentary navigation equipment to set a course away from the island, hoping to reach a shipping lane where they might be rescued. As the island faded into the distance, Lyra clutched the data drive containing their hard-won evidence. "What we've uncovered," she said, her voice barely audible over the storm. "It changes everything." Philip nodded, his arm tightening around her. "And there are people who will do anything to keep it buried." The fishing boat pitched in the rough seas, carrying them towards an uncertain future. The storm raged on, mirroring the turmoil of the world they were fighting to protect. As dawn broke on the horizon, Philip and Lyra knew their journey was just getting started. As dawn broke on the horizon, Philip and Lyra knew their journey was just beginning. The storm gradually began to subside, revealing a vast expanse of choppy seas. Exhausted and battered, they scanned the horizon for any sign of salvation. Suddenly, Lyra's keen eyes spotted a dark shape in the distance. "Philip, look!" she exclaimed, pointing to the silhouette of a large vessel emerging from the mist. Philip squinted, his enhanced vision confirming Lyra's discovery. "It's a cargo ship," he said, a glimmer of hope in his voice. Without hesitation, Lyra scrambled to locate the fishing boat's emergency kit. Her fingers closed around a cylindrical object, a distress flare. She held it up triumphantly. "Let's hope this works," Philip said, taking the flare from her. With a sharp crack, the flare ignited, sending a bright red streak into the sky. They watched anxiously as the crimson light arced over the waves, praying it would catch the attention of the distant vessel. Minutes passed like hours as they waited, the small fishing boat rocking precariously in the diminishing swells. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, the cargo ship began to alter its course. "They've seen us!" Lyra cried out, relief washing over her. As the massive ship drew closer, they could make out figures on the deck, preparing for a rescue operation. A loudspeaker crackled to life, its message carried over the waves. "Hold your position. We're coming to get you." Soon, the cargo vessel loomed over them, its hull a towering wall of steel. Crew members lowered a rescue basket, calling out instructions. Philip helped Lyra into the basket first, ensuring she had a firm grip on their precious data drive before signaling for her to be lifted. Once Lyra was safely aboard, the basket descended again for Philip. As he was pulled up the side of the ship, he took one last look at the fishing boat that had been their lifeline. It seemed impossibly small now, bobbing in the ship's wake. On deck, they were immediately surrounded by the crew. A man who introduced himself as the ship's doctor ushered them below decks, where they were given dry clothes and a thorough medical examination. "You're lucky we found you," the doctor said as he checked Philip's vitals. "What were you doing out there in that storm?" Philip and Lyra exchanged a quick glance before Philip answered. "Our yacht capsized. We were the only survivors." The doctor nodded sympathetically, accepting their story without question. "Well, you're safe now. We're bound for Singapore. You can rest and recover until we make port." Left alone in a small cabin, Philip and Lyra finally had a moment to process their narrow escape. Lyra pulled out the data drive, turning it over in her hands. "We need to review this information," she said in a low voice. "Figure out our next move." Philip nodded, his expression grave. "Agreed, but we need to be careful. We can't risk anyone on this ship discovering what we have. Over the next few days, they took turns analyzing the stolen data on a tablet they'd been loaned, always ensuring one of them kept watch. What they uncovered was staggering. A list of high-ranking officials involved in the genetic modification program, including names from both human and Saurian governments. As the ship neared Singapore, Philip and Lyra realized they needed a secure way to transmit their findings. Using the ship's communication equipment under the guise of contacting relatives, they sent an encrypted message to Dr. Ava Henderson, arranging a meeting in Singapore. The bustling port of Singapore came into view, its skyline a forest of gleaming skyscrapers. Philip and Lyra thanked the ship's crew for their rescue and disembarked, blending seamlessly into the crowd of passengers and dock workers. They made their way through the city, their hybrid senses on high alert for any sign of pursuit. The rendezvous point was a small cafe nestled in the heart of Singapore's vibrant Chinatown. As they approached, Philip spotted Dr. Ava Henderson seated at an outdoor table, accompanied by a man they didn't recognize. Lyra tensed, her hand brushing against Philip's. "Who's that with her?" "I don't know," Philip murmured. "But we're about to find out." They approached the table cautiously. Dr. Henderson's eyes lit up with recognition, and she stood to greet them. "Philip, Lyra," she said warmly. "I'm so glad you made it. This is Captain Marcus Lee, a former intelligence officer who's been investigating the program independently." Captain Lee stood, offering his hand. "Dr. Henderson has told me about your work. I'm impressed with what you've uncovered so far." As they sat down, a waiter approached with a tray of steaming cups of coffee. The rich aroma provided a moment of normalcy amidst the tension of their clandestine meeting. "We have critical information," Lyra said, her voice low. She produced a data drive from a hidden pocket. "But we need a secure way to distribute it." Captain Lee nodded, pulling out a small device. "This will create a secure Wi-Fi hotspot. We can upload the data to a protected server I've set up." As they sipped their coffee, appearing to any observer like friends catching up, they carefully transferred the stolen data. Once complete, Captain Lee confirmed its successful upload. "Now," he said, leaning in, "we need to discuss our next steps." For the next hour, they analyzed the information and debated their options. It was decided that Dr. Henderson and Captain Lee would work on verifying the list of officials involved, while Philip and Lyra would pursue a lead on a suspected hybrid training facility in Eastern Europe. Before they parted ways, Captain Lee produced a small case. "You'll need these," he said, opening it to reveal what looked like ordinary contact lenses and watches. "Advanced disguise technology. It can temporarily alter your appearance. Crucial for your mission in Eastern Europe." Philip examined the devices with interest. "How do they work?" "The lenses use a form of adaptive camouflage to change your eye color and facial structure," Lee explained. "The watches contain a sophisticated holographic projector that can alter your overall appearance. They're controlled by subtle eye movements and gestures." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the bustling streets of Chinatown, they prepared to go their separate ways. Dr. Henderson hugged Philip and Lyra tightly. "Be careful," she whispered. "What you're about to do. It's more dangerous than anything you've faced so far." With new identities provided by Captain Lee, Philip and Lyra made their way to Changi Airport. As they boarded their flight to Budapest, the weight of their mission settled upon them. The plane took off, carrying them towards an uncertain future and the next phase of their perilous journey. As their plane touched down in Budapest, Philip and Lyra wasted no time. They quickly made their way through the bustling airport, their new identities holding up under scrutiny. The city's historic architecture and vibrant streets provided the perfect cover as they began their reconnaissance. Over the next few days, they meticulously gathered intelligence on the suspected hybrid training facility. Using their enhanced senses and the advanced technology provided by Captain Lee, they pieced together the facility's location, an abandoned factory on the outskirts of the city. Under the cover of darkness, Philip and Lyra staked out the factory, observing the comings and goings of unmarked vehicles. Their patience paid off when they intercepted a coded transmission about an incoming transport of new hybrid subjects. "This is our chance," Philip whispered, his eyes fixed on the factory's hidden entrance. "We intercept that transport, we get inside." Lyra nodded, her hand instinctively reaching for the disguise technology. "Let's move." They positioned themselves along the expected route, their hybrid physiology allowing them to blend seamlessly into the shadows. The night air was crisp, filled with the subtle sounds of nocturnal wildlife, a sharp contrast to the tension that hung between them. Hours passed before the low rumble of an approaching vehicle broke the silence. Philip tensed, his enhanced vision picking out the transport long before it came into view. He signaled to Lyra, who was already moving into position. As the transport slowed to navigate a sharp turn, Philip and Lyra struck. With lightning speed, they neutralized the escort team, using precise, non-lethal strikes to subdue them. The operation was over in seconds, executed with an efficiency that spoke to their rigorous training. "Quickly," Philip urged, dragging an unconscious guard towards a nearby abandoned building. "We need to secure them before we move on." Once the escort team was safely hidden away, Philip and Lyra activated their disguise technology. The air around them shimmered as the advanced holographic projectors altered their appearances. Within moments, they had assumed the identities of the escort team members. Philip took the wheel of the transport vehicle, his fingers dancing across the unfamiliar controls. Lyra settled into the passenger seat, activating the communication equipment. "Ready?" Philip asked, his voice now deeper, matching his new appearance. Lyra nodded, her own voice altered to match her disguise. "Let's do this." The transport rumbled to life, and they set off towards the facility. As they approached the hidden entrance, Lyra transmitted the clearance codes they had gleaned from their earlier surveillance. There was a moment of tense silence before the massive metal doors began to slide open. Philip guided the vehicle into a vast underground complex, navigating through a series of checkpoints. Each time they were stopped, Lyra's heart raced, but their disguises held up under scrutiny. Finally, they reached the main unloading area. Medical staff swarmed around the transport as Philip and Lyra began the process of transferring the sleeping hybrid subjects. The commotion provided the perfect cover for their true mission. "I'm going to find the data hub," Philip murmured to Lyra. "Keep them distracted." As Lyra continued to oversee the transfer, gathering valuable intelligence on the hybrid subjects, Philip slipped away. He moved through the facility with purpose, his eyes scanning for any sign of the central data hub. Finally, he found it, a room filled with servers and blinking lights. Using the device provided by Captain Lee, Philip bypassed the security systems and began downloading critical information about the hybrid program. As data streamed into the device, Philip's eyes widened. He discovered plans for a mass production of hybrid soldiers, set to begin within the month. The implications were staggering. Without hesitation, he transmitted this crucial information to Dr. Henderson and Captain Lee. Meanwhile, Lyra had learned of an impending visit from a high-ranking official. She discreetly relayed this information to Philip as he rejoined her, recognizing the potential opportunity it presented. With their primary objectives accomplished, they prepared to leave. However, a sharp-eyed security officer had become suspicious of their behavior. As they made their way towards the exit, alarms suddenly blared throughout the complex. "Our cover's blown," Philip shouted, abandoning his disguise. "Run!" They sprinted through the facility, their enhanced abilities now on full display as they fought through waves of security personnel. Fists flew and bodies crumpled as they cleared a path to the vehicle bay. Philip leapt into the nearest high-speed transport, Lyra close behind. The vehicle roared to life, and they crashed through the outer defenses, emerging into the underground tunnels leading to the surface. A high-speed chase ensued, with Philip expertly piloting the stolen vehicle through narrow passages. Lyra manned the weapon systems, clearing a path through security barriers and pursuing vehicles. They burst through the walls of the abandoned factory into the cool night air, leaving chaos in their wake. As they sped away from the facility, the weight of their discovery pressed heavily upon them. "We need to contact Dr. Henderson and Captain Lee," Lyra said, her voice tight with urgency. "This changes everything." Philip nodded grimly, pushing the vehicle to its limits as they raced towards their predetermined safe house. The information they carried could alter the course of human-saurian relations forever. But first, they had to survive long enough to share it. As dawn broke over the Eastern European countryside, Philip and Lyra abandoned the stolen vehicle in a remote area. They set out on foot, their enhanced stamina allowing them to cover ground quickly. The safe house lay ahead, and with it, the next phase of their dangerous mission. As they approached the outskirts of a small town outside Budapest, Philip and Lyra's heightened senses remained on alert for any sign of pursuit. The safe house came into view, a nondescript apartment building that blended seamlessly with its surroundings. Philip parked their commandeered vehicle in a secluded alley and nodded to Lyra. "Let's move. Stay sharp." They made their way to the apartment, using a series of prearranged signals to ensure they weren't being followed. As they reached the door, Lyra tapped out a complex rhythm, their agreed-upon knock. The door opened, revealing Dr. Ava Henderson's worried face. "Thank goodness you're here," she whispered, ushering them inside. Captain Marcus Lee stood by a table covered in maps and computer equipment. "We received your transmission," he said, his voice tense. "The situation is even worse than we feared." For the next several hours, the group pored over the data Philip and Lyra had acquired from the Eastern European facility. They cross-referenced it with their existing intelligence, piecing together a horrifying picture of the hybrid program's true scope. As the sun began to set, Dr. Henderson's eyes widened. "I've found something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The location of the program's central command center. The room fell silent as she pulled up a series of encrypted files on her laptop. "It's in the Swiss Alps," she explained, pointing to a seemingly innocuous area on a digital map. "Heavily fortified and completely off the grid." Captain Lee leaned in, studying the information. "This is it," he said, his voice filled with a mix of excitement and apprehension. "If we can infiltrate this facility, we'll have everything we need to expose the program." Using his intelligence contacts, Lee procured detailed schematics of the Alpine facility. The team gathered around, examining the complex security systems and defenses. "Biometric scanners, automated turrets, hybrid guards," Philip muttered, shaking his head. "A frontal assault would be suicide." Lyra nodded in agreement. "We need another way in." Philip's eyes narrowed as he studied the blueprints. Suddenly, he straightened up. "I have an idea," he said, his voice filled with persistence. "We go in as scientists, transferring new hybrid subjects." The team listened intently as Philip outlined his plan. Using their insider knowledge in the disguise technology, they would pose as a research team, bypassing the external security measures. Once inside, they would split up to gather evidence and sabotage key systems. As they debated the finer points of the plan, a secure communication channel crackled to life. Captain Lee answered, his eyebrows raising in surprise. "It's Commander Hayes and Security Chief Kala," he announced, putting the call on speaker. The voices of the human and saurian officers filled the room, explaining their discovery of corruption within their own ranks. They offered their assistance, providing crucial intelligence on the movements of both species security forces. With this unexpected alliance, the team's plan began to take shape. Over the next few days, they gathered equipment and crafted false identities. Dr. Henderson worked tirelessly in a makeshift lab, creating a serum to enhance Philip and Lyra's hybrid traits temporarily. Captain Lee procured a transport vehicle, modifying it with hidden compartments for weapons and hacking equipment. The safe house buzzed with activity as they prepared for their most dangerous mission yet. The night before their departure, Philip found Lyra on the apartment's small balcony, gazing at the stars. He joined her, their shoulders touching as they stood in silence. "Are you ready for this?" he asked softly. Lyra turned to him, her eyes reflecting the willpower that had brought them this far. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied. Their eyes met, and in that moment, the weight of their mission seemed to press down on them. Without a word, they drew closer, their lips meeting in a passionate kiss. They clung to each other, finding solace and strength in their connection. As dawn broke, the team loaded their equipment into the transport vehicle. Dr. Henderson administered the enhancement serum to Philip and Lyra, their bodies tingling as the hybrid traits became more pronounced. "Remember," Captain Lee said as they prepared to depart, "once you're inside, you'll have a limited window to gather evidence and initiate the data dump. We'll be monitoring from here, ready to broadcast to news outlets worldwide." With final nods of understanding, Philip and Lyra climbed into the transport. As they drove away from the safe house, the enormity of their task settled over them. The fate of human-saurian relations rested on the success of their mission. The journey through the Alps was tense, each winding road bringing them closer to their target. As they approached the facility, Philip activated their disguises. The air shimmered around them as the holographic projectors altered their appearances. The transport slowed as they neared the main gate. Heavily armed guards and advanced scanning equipment came into view. Philip took a deep breath, assuming the role of lead scientist. As they pulled up to the checkpoint, a guard approached, his hybrid features evident even through his stern expression. Philip presented their forged credentials, his heart racing as the guard scrutinized the documents. For a moment, it seemed their ruse might be discovered. The guard's eyes narrowed, and he gestured to a colleague. Lyra's hand inched towards a concealed weapon, ready for the worst. But then, the guard nodded and waved them through. The massive blast doors began to open, revealing the interior of the facility. As they drove inside, Philip and Lyra exchanged a determined look. The first hurdle had been cleared, but the real challenge lay ahead. The central command center of the hybrid program loomed before them, its secrets waiting to be uncovered. With their cover intact for now, they prepared to execute the most daring phase of their mission. The transport continued deeper into the facility, carrying them towards a confrontation that would determine the future of two species. As they approached the towering gates of the Alpine facility, Philip and Lyra exchanged a tense glance. Their disguises shimmered, transforming them into nondescript scientists. Philip guided the transport vehicle towards the security checkpoint, his squeezing hard on the steering wheel. A guard with hybrid features approached, his eyes narrowing as he scrutinized their forged credentials. Lyra held her breath, her hand inching towards a concealed weapon. After what felt like an eternity, the guard nodded and waved them through. The massive blast doors groaned open, revealing the sprawling interior of the facility. As they drove inside, Philip muttered, "We're in. Now comes the hard part." Once clear of the initial security checkpoint, the team split into two groups. Dr. Henderson and Captain Lee veered off towards the hybrid production area, while Philip and Lyra made their way to the central data hub. Philip and Lyra moved swiftly through the facility, their enhanced abilities allowing them to bypass security checkpoints with ease. They reached a heavily fortified door marked Restricted Access. Philip pressed his palm against the biometric scanner, holding his breath as it processed the forged prints. The light flashed green, and the door hissed open. They stepped into a cavernous room filled with rows of servers and holographic displays. Philip's eyes widened at the sheer volume of data flowing through the systems. "This is it," he whispered. "Everything we need to expose the program." While Philip began the data extraction process, Lyra took up a position near the door, her heightened senses on full alert. She could hear the faint echoes of footsteps in distant corridors, her muscles tensing with each sound. Meanwhile, Dr. Henderson and Captain Lee infiltrated the hybrid production area. The sight that greeted them was both fascinating and horrifying. Rows of large, cylindrical tanks lined the walls, each containing a partially developed hybrid being suspended in a viscous fluid. Dr. Henderson moved quickly, collecting tissue samples and capturing high-resolution images of the facility. Her hands shook slightly as she worked, the enormity of their discovery weighing heavily on her. Captain Lee made his way to the production control center, a compact room filled with monitors and control panels. He inserted a specialized device into one of the computer terminals, initiating a carefully designed program to sabotage the hybrid creation process. Back in the data hub, Philip's fingers flew across the holographic interface as he worked to extract and transmit the critical information. Suddenly, a shrill alarm blared throughout the facility, causing both Philip and Lyra to flinch. "They've detected us," Lyra shouted over the noise. "We need to move." Philip frantically completed the data transfer, confirming the successful transmission to their secure server. As he disconnected from the system, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the corridor outside. The door burst open, and a squad of security personnel rushed in. Lyra sprang into action, her enhanced strength and agility catching the guards off guard. She ducked under a swing from the first guard, using his momentum to throw him into his companions. Philip joined the fray, his own hybrid abilities allowing him to move within human speed. They fought their way out of the data hub, leaving a trail of unconscious guards in their wake. In the hybrid production area, Dr. Henderson and Captain Lee heard the alarm and knew their time was up. Lee initiated the final stage of the sabotage, causing the hybrid production tanks to begin shutting down one by one. As they made their escape, they rounded a corner and came face to face with a group of fully developed hybrid soldiers. The hybrids moved with lethal grace, their eyes cold and predatory. Captain Lee stepped forward, his combat training kicking in. "Get the evidence out," he shouted to Dr. Henderson. "I'll hold them off." Lee engaged the hybrid soldiers, his skills pushed to the limit as he fought against their superior strength and speed. Dr. Henderson clutched their collected evidence, her heart pounding as she searched for an escape route. Philip and Lyra fought their way through waves of security personnel, their destination the facility's vehicle bay. They burst through the doors, quickly scanning the area for a suitable escape vehicle. "There!" Lyra pointed to a sleek, high-speed transport designed for mountain terrain. They sprinted towards the vehicle, Philip leaping into the driver's seat while Lyra took control of the weapon systems. The transport roared to life, its powerful engine echoing through the bay. "Hold on," Philip warned as he gunned the engine. The transport shot forward, crashing through the bay doors and out onto the snowy mountain roads. Alarms blared behind them as facility security scrambled to give chase. Philip navigated the treacherous hairpin turns with expert precision, the transport's tires finding grip on the icy surface. In the rear-view mirror, he could see a convoy of security vehicles in hot pursuit. Lyra activated the weapon system, targeting the lead pursuing vehicle. A burst of energy erupted from the transport, causing the security vehicle to swerve and crash into a snowbank. As they raced down the mountain, Philip's communicator crackled to life. "This is Henderson. We've been extracted by Commander Hayes. What's your status?" "We're on the run," Philip replied, his voice tight with concentration as he navigated a particularly sharp turn, heading to the secondary rendezvous point. The pursuing vehicles were closing in, their weapons fire peppering the back of the transport. Lyra returned fire, managing to disable several more pursuers, but their own vehicle was taking heavy damage. As they rounded a bend, Philip's eyes widened in horror. A massive wall of snow and debris blocked their path, an avalanche triggered by the firefight. "We're running out of options," Lyra shouted, spotting a narrow gap in the avalanche. Philip gritted his teeth, making a split-second decision. "We're going through." He gunned the engine, aiming for the gap. The transport shot forward, threading the needle between tons of cascading snow and rock. For a moment, it seemed they might make it through, but the avalanche was too fast, too powerful. The transport was engulfed, tossed like a toy in the churning mass of snow and debris. Philip and Lyra shared one last look before leaping from the doomed vehicle, their enhanced bodies allowing them to survive the impact as they tumbled down the mountainside. When the world finally stopped spinning, Philip found himself half buried in snow at the base of the mountain. He struggled to his feet, scanning the area frantically. "Lyra," he called out, his voice hoarse. A mound of snow nearby shifted, and Lyra emerged, battered but alive. They quickly took stock of their situation. The sounds of search parties echoed in the distance, growing closer by the minute. "We can't outrun them forever," Lyra said, wincing as she tested her injuries. Philip nodded grimly. "We need to find somewhere to hide, regroup." As night fell, they made their way through the dense forest at the base of the mountain. Their enhanced senses allowed them to navigate the darkness, avoiding detection by the search parties that combed the area. Finally, they stumbled upon a small, abandoned hunting cabin tucked away in a clearing. Philip quickly assessed the structure, nodding in approval. "This will do." They worked together to cover their tracks and secure the perimeter, using their training and survival skills to ensure they wouldn't be easily discovered. Inside the cabin, they found some basic supplies and a first aid kit. As Philip tended to a nasty gash on Lyra's arm, their eyes met. The adrenaline of their escape began to fade, replaced by a mix of exhaustion and a deeper, unspoken connection. "We did it," Lyra said softly, wincing slightly as Philip finished bandaging her wound. Philip nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "We're not out of the woods yet, but we've got the data. Now we just need to get it to the right people." They huddled together near the cabin's small fireplace, listening to the distant sounds of the search parties. Morning would bring new challenges, but for now, they had a moment of respite. As Philip began to outline potential plans for contacting their allies and getting the stolen data to the authorities, Lyra's enhanced hearing picked up a new sound. She held up a hand, silencing Philip. "Someone's coming," she whispered, her body tensing for another fight. Philip moved to the cabin's single window, peering out into the darkness. In the distance, he could see the faint glow of flashlights moving through the trees, growing closer by the second. Philip tensed, ready for another confrontation. But as the figures emerged from the shadows, he recognized a familiar face. "Commander Hayes?" he whispered in disbelief. The commander nodded, his expression grim. "We've been searching for you. It's time to move." With the sounds of pursuit growing closer, Philip and Lyra had no choice but to trust their allies. They quickly gathered their meager supplies and followed Hayes and his team into the night. As dawn broke, casting long shadows through the forest, the group reached a hidden clearing where a small aircraft waited. They boarded swiftly, the engines roaring to life as they took off into the brightening sky. Once airborne, Hayes briefed them on the situation. Dr. Henderson and Captain Lee made it out with the evidence. They've already delivered it to trusted officials in both human and Saurian governments. Lyra leaned forward, her eyes intense. "So it's over?" Hayes shook his head. "Not quite. Powerful figures involved in the hybrid program are working to discredit the evidence and suppress the information. We need you two to testify." The aircraft touched down on the outskirts of a small mountain village. Hayes handed them a small bag of cash and a prepaid cell phone. "We can't risk staying together. Make your way to Geneva. There's a safe house where you'll meet with sympathetic UN diplomats." Philip and Lyra nodded, understanding the gravity of their mission. They watched as Hayes and his team took off, leaving them alone once more. Cautiously, they made their way into the village, their enhanced senses on high alert for any signs of pursuit. At a small general store, they purchased basic supplies, keeping their interactions brief and unremarkable. Finding a secluded spot outside the village, Philip dialed the secure number Hayes had provided. The commander's voice crackled through the line, providing them with the details of the safe house in Geneva. Their journey to Geneva was a tense affair. They hitchhiked when possible, used public transportation when necessary, always watchful for increased security presence at transportation hubs and border crossings. Their disguise technology was used sparingly, the power supply dwindling with each use. As they neared the city, news reports on public screens caught their attention. An emergency session of the United Nations Security Council had been called to address unspecified threats to global security. Philip and Lyra exchanged knowing glances, realizing the magnitude of their actions. Geneva's streets were abuzz with activity as they made their way to the safe house. The nondescript apartment building blended seamlessly into its surroundings, offering no hint of its importance. Inside, they were greeted by a small group of diplomats led by Ambassador Elena Vasquez. Her piercing gaze softened as she took in their weary appearance. "You've been through quite an ordeal. Thank you for coming." Over the next few hours, Philip and Lyra provided a detailed briefing on their experiences and the extent of the hybrid program. The diplomats listened intently, their expressions a mix of horror and fascination. "Your very existence," Vasquez said, gesturing to Philip and Lyra, "is proof that peaceful coexistence between humans and saurians is possible. We need to show the world." Her words were cut short by a deafening explosion. The windows shattered, showering the room with glass. Through the smoke and debris, Philip caught sight of figures moving with inhuman speed and grace. "Hybrid soldiers!" he shouted, pushing Vasquez behind cover. In an instant, the safe house erupted into chaos. Philip and Lyra moved in perfect synchronization, their enhanced abilities allowing them to match the intruder's speed and strength. They fought furiously, protecting the diplomats while trying to subdue their attackers. Philip found himself face-to-face with the leader of the hybrid team, a towering figure with cold, calculating eyes. They exchanged a flurry of blows, each testing the other's limits. With a well-timed feint, Philip managed to throw the leader off balance, sending him crashing into a wall. Across the room, Lyra had corralled the diplomats into a secure corner, using her body as a shield while fending off multiple attackers. Her movements were a blur, striking with precision and power. The sound of approaching sirens cut through the din of battle. The hybrid soldiers, realizing their mission was compromised, began to retreat. Their leader, still dazed from Philip's attack, was left behind. As security forces swarmed the building, Vasquez emerged from cover, her eyes blazing with dedication. "This changes everything. The world needs to know the truth, and they need to hear it from you." In the aftermath of the attack, decisions were made quickly. Vasquez arranged for Philip and Lyra to address the emergency session of the UN Security Council. As they prepared for this crucial meeting, the weight of responsibility settled heavily on their shoulders. The next morning, Philip and Lyra found themselves at the entrance of the United Nations headquarters. Security was tight, with both human and saurian guards scrutinizing every individual entering the building. As they approached the Security Council chamber, Philip felt Lyra's hand slip into his. They paused for a moment, drawing strength from each other. The doors loomed before them, representing not just a physical threshold, but the cusp of a new era in human-saurian relations. With a shared nod of tenacity, Philip and Lyra stepped forward. The doors swung open, revealing a room filled with the most powerful leaders from both species. All eyes turned to them as they entered, the chamber falling into expectant silence. Philip took a deep breath, his enhanced senses taking in every detail of the room. He could feel the tension, the curiosity, and the fear emanating from the assembled dignitaries. As he prepared to speak, he knew that his words would shape the future of both their species. As he prepared to speak, he knew that his words would shape the future of both their worlds. Esteemed members of the Security Council, Philip began, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. We stand before you today not just as individuals, but as living proof of what is possible when our two species come together. Lyra stepped forward, her presence commanding attention. What we are about to share with you will challenge everything you thought you knew about human-saurian relations. With a gesture from Philip, holographic projections filled the air above the council table. Images of the Alpine facility materialized, showing row upon row of hybrid production tanks. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the assembly as the full scale of the operation became apparent. These images, Philip continued, represent just one of many secret facilities dedicated to the creation of human-saurian hybrids like ourselves. Lyra took over, her voice clear and unwavering. We were not the result of natural conception, but of a clandestine program designed to create enhanced individuals with the strengths of both species. As they spoke, detailing their experiences and the data they had extracted from the facility's central hub, the reactions from the assembled leaders ranged from shock to disbelief to awe-inspiring outrage. A human diplomat from the United States stood up abruptly. This is preposterous. How can we trust a word of these abominations? Before Philip could respond, a Saurian representative hissed in anger. You dare question their integrity when your own kind has clearly violated our treaties? Ambassador Vasquez intervened, her voice cutting through the growing chaos. We have corroborating evidence. She nodded to a group of guards, who escorted a figure into the chamber. Philip recognized him immediately, the hybrid program official captured during their escape. The man looked haggard, his eyes darting nervously around the room. Under questioning from Vasquez, the official confirmed Philip and Lyra's testimony, providing names of high-ranking individuals involved in the project. With each revelation, the tension in the room ratcheted higher. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the building. Ambassador Vasquez received an urgent message on her comm device. Security has been breached, she announced, her face grim. A group of protesters has entered the building. Chaos erupted in the chamber as security forces rushed to secure the entrances. Through the commotion, Philip could hear the chants of the protesters echoing through the halls. No hybrids, no cooperation. As the Security Council members were ushered to safety, Philip and Lyra found themselves face to face with Dr. Cross, the scientist who had been monitoring their genetic changes since their escape. I have news, Cross said hurriedly, his eyes darting around the chaotic room. Your hybrid physiology has stabilized. You've achieved a perfect balance, enhanced abilities without further mutation. Before they could fully process this information, Ambassador Vasquez appeared at their side. We need to move you to a secure location, she said urgently. Your presence here is too valuable to risk. As they were led through a maze of corridors, Philip's enhanced hearing picked up fragments of heated debates from various rooms they passed. The fate of existing hybrids, the future of human-saurian relations, and calls for immediate action all mingled in a cacophony of voices. They emerged into a smaller, heavily guarded chamber where a group of key diplomats had gathered to continue the discussions. The atmosphere was tense, with accusations flying between human and saurian representatives. We demand to know if this hybrid program was intended as a military advantage against our people. A saurian diplomat snarled, her scaled skin flushing with anger. Ambassador Vasquez stepped in, her voice calm but authoritative. This situation affects all of us. I propose we form a joint human-saurian oversight committee to investigate the full extent of the program and determine its future. As the diplomats debated this proposal, An aide burst into the room, his face pale. "We've just received reports," he announced breathlessly. "Several hybrid production facilities around the world have initiated emergency protocols. They're attempting to accelerate the development of their subjects." The room fell silent for a moment as the implications sank in. Then, as one, the assembled leaders turned to Philip and Lyra. "We need your help," Vasquez said, her eyes meeting theirs. "Your unique insights and abilities make you invaluable in addressing this crisis." Philip exchanged a glance with Lyra, seeing his own dedication reflected in her eyes. They nodded in unison. "What do you need us to do?" Philip asked. "We're establishing a multinational task force," Vasquez explained quickly. "A combination of human and Saurian military assets to secure and shut down all known hybrid facilities. We want you to join as advisors." As the details of the operation were hastily outlined, Philip felt a mix of anticipation and apprehension. They were about to embark on a mission that would not only test their abilities, but also shape the future of both their species. The meeting concluded with a flurry of activity. As Philip and Lyra were led out of the building, they found themselves facing a sea of faces, some cheering, others hostile. The world was waking up to their existence, and the reactions were as varied as they were intense. Suddenly, a commotion erupted near the front of the crowd. Philip's enhanced senses picked up the movement a split second before it happened. A figure lunged forward, a weapon glinting in the sunlight. "Look out!" Philip shouted, pulling Lyra aside as the attacker's blade whistled through the air where they had been standing. In an instant, the scene devolved into chaos. UN security personnel swarmed around them, creating a protective barrier as they hustled Philip and Lyra towards an armored vehicle. As the door slammed shut and the vehicle sped away from the UN headquarters, Philip's comm device buzzed. Commander Hayes' voice came through, tight with urgency. "We have a situation," Hayes said without preamble. "A rogue faction within the hybrid program has activated a fail-safe protocol. They're threatening to release an army of unstable hybrid soldiers in major cities worldwide." Philip met Lyra's gaze, seeing his own tenacity mirrored there. "We're ready," he said. "What's our next move?" "Head to the nearby military base," Hayes instructed. "You'll be briefing a joint human-Saurian special forces team. Then you're going in." As the vehicle changed course, heading for the base, Philip felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. The next few hours would be crucial, not just for them, but for the future of human-Saurian relations and the fate of hybrids everywhere. The military base was a hive of activity when they arrived. Human and Saurian soldiers moved with purpose, preparing for the unprecedented joint operation. Philip and Lyra were immediately ushered into a briefing room filled with elite operatives from both species. As they began to share their knowledge of hybrid capabilities and weaknesses, Philip couldn't help but feel a sense of irony. They had been created as potential weapons, and now they were the key to preventing a catastrophe born from the same program that had given them life. With the briefing concluded, they boarded a high-speed transport alongside the strike team. Their destination, a hybrid facility in Northern Europe believed to be the source of the fail-safe protocol. As the transport lifted off, Philip felt a familiar surge of adrenaline. He looked at Lyra, saw the same mix of purpose and apprehension in her eyes. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, not just as partners, but as pioneers of a new era in human-Saurian relations. The transport streaked across the sky, carrying them towards an uncertain future. But one thing was clear: the world as they knew it was about to change forever. The transport's engines hummed as it cut through the sky, carrying Philip, Lyra, and the joint human-Saurian strike team towards their destination. Philip's enhanced senses picked up the subtle shifts in air pressure as they began their descent. He glanced at Lyra, her scales glinting in the dim light of the cabin. "We're approaching the facility," the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "ETA 2 minutes." As the transport touched down, Philip's eyes widened at the scene before them. The hybrid facility, a sprawling complex of steel and concrete, buzzed with frantic activity. Guards patrolled the perimeter in increased numbers, their movements urgent and purposeful. "Looks like the fail-safe protocol is already in motion," Lyra observed, her voice tight with concern. Commander Hayes' voice came through their comm devices. "Team, we need to move fast. Philip, Lyra, take your squad to the maintenance entrance. The main force will create a diversion at the front gates." Philip nodded, his hybrid physiology primed for action. He led a small group of human and saurian operatives towards a concealed entrance at the rear of the facility. As they approached, he felt Lyra's presence at his side, their movements in perfect sync. With a gesture, Philip signaled to the team. He placed his hand on the access panel, his hybrid DNA bypassing the security protocols. The door slid open silently, revealing a dimly lit corridor. As they moved through the facility, Philip's enhanced hearing picked up the sounds of chaos erupting at the main entrance. The diversion was working. They encountered their first resistance at a junction of corridors. Two hybrid guards, their eyes wide with surprise, raised their weapons. Philip and Lyra moved in tandem, their combined strength and speed overwhelming the guards before they could fire a shot. "This way," Lyra whispered, her instincts guiding them through the maze-like structure. They navigated through a series of checkpoints, Philip's hybrid abilities allowing them to bypass security measures with ease. As they neared the central control room, the facility's alarms began to blare. "They've detected us," one of the saurian operatives hissed. Philip's mind raced, calculating their options. "We push forward," he decided. "We're too close to turn back now." They burst into the control room, weapons at the ready. Philip's eyes locked onto a familiar figure standing at the main console, Dr. Marcus Henderson, the man they believed to be in custody. "Henderson," Philip growled, his voice a mix of surprise and anger. The scientist turned, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Ah, our prize specimens. I wondered when you'd arrive." As Henderson spoke, Philip noticed subtle changes in the man's physique. His muscles seemed denser, his movements more fluid. "You've hybridized yourself," Philip realized aloud. Henderson's smile widened. "Observant as always, Philip." "Yes, I've embraced the future, our future." With a gesture from Henderson, a group of hybrid guards emerged from the shadows. The room erupted into chaos as Philip, Lyra, and their team engaged the enemy. Philip found himself facing off against Henderson, their enhanced abilities evenly matched. They traded blows at superhuman speed, each impact reverberating through the room. Through the corner of his eye, Philip saw Lyra making her way to the main computer terminal. She fought off two guards, her movements a blur of grace and power. "Philip," Lyra called out, "I'm initiating the shutdown sequence for the stasis pods." Henderson snarled, redoubling his efforts to break free from Philip's grasp. "You fools! You'll doom us all!" As Lyra's fingers flew over the keyboard, alarms began to blare throughout the facility. A computerized voice echoed through the room. "Warning, self-destruct sequence initiated. All personnel evacuate immediately." Philip's momentary distraction allowed Henderson to land a powerful blow, sending him staggering back. The scientist lunged for Lyra, but Philip recovered quickly, intercepting him mid-leap. Their fight carried them onto a walkway suspended over a vast chamber filled with inactive hybrid pods. Below, Philip could see the pods beginning to power down, their occupants safely contained. With a burst of strength, Philip finally gained the upper hand. He pinned Henderson against the railing, the scientist's enhanced strength failing against Philip's superior training and experience. "It's over, Henderson," Philip said, securing the struggling scientist. Lyra appeared at his side, her eyes filled with urgency. "We need to move. This place is going to blow in minutes." Philip nodded, hauling Henderson to his feet. "Let's go. We're taking him with us." They raced through the crumbling facility, guiding their team and the few stable hybrids they encountered towards the exit. The building shook with pre-explosion tremors, chunks of ceiling raining down around them. As they burst out into the open air, Philip saw the Joint Strike Force securing the perimeter, rounding up any escape hybrids. They sprinted towards the waiting transport vehicles, the ground rumbling beneath their feet. The team piled into the transports, engines roaring to life as they sped away from the doomed facility. From a safe distance, they watched as a series of explosions tore through the complex, reducing it to a smoldering ruin. In the aftermath, Philip and Lyra worked tirelessly with the Joint Task Force, processing captured hybrids and securing vital data recovered from the facility's computers. Reports trickled in of similar operations around the world, all successful in averting the release of unstable hybrid armies. As the immediate crisis subsided, Philip found a moment to catch his breath. He looked at Lyra, her scales shimmering with exertion and willpower. They had faced the challenge together, their unique bond stronger than ever. But as Philip's gaze drifted to the horizon, he knew their work was far from finished. The world was changing rapidly, and they would need to adapt to the new reality they had helped create. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Philip was certain of one thing. He and Lyra would face them side by side, bridging the gap between humans and saurians, and carving out a place for hybrids in this brave new world. As Philip contemplated the challenges ahead, his calm device buzzed with an urgent message from Commander Hayes. "Philip, Lyra, we have a new development." Hayes' voice crackled through the speaker. "Our intelligence has uncovered a hidden underwater hybrid facility in the Pacific. We need you two for a covert operation." Philip exchanged a knowing look with Lyra. Their work was indeed a long way to go. In the weeks that followed, Philip and Lyra immersed themselves in intensive training for deep-sea operations. Their hybrid physiology proved invaluable as they pushed the limits of their endurance in high-pressure environments. During a particularly grueling underwater combat simulation, Philip marveled at Lyra's agility. Her saurian heritage allowed her to move through the water with incredible grace. As they sparred in the training tank, Philip's enhanced strength matched her fluid movements, creating a deadly dance beneath the surface. "You're getting better at this," Lyra said as they surfaced, her scales glistening under the fluorescent lights. Philip grinned, shaking water from his hair. "I had a good teacher." Their training culminated in the introduction of their mission vehicle, a cutting-edge submersible designed specifically for hybrid operatives. As they boarded the sleek vessel for the first time, Philip ran his hand along the smooth, black exterior. "It's beautiful," he murmured, taking in the array of advanced controls and hybrid-compatible interfaces. Lyra nodded, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "And it's all ours." Over the next few days, they familiarized themselves with every aspect of the submersible, from its stealth capabilities to its emergency protocols. The vessel became an extension of themselves, responding to their hybrid physiology in ways that surpassed even the most advanced human or saurian technology. As the launch date approached, the atmosphere at the base grew tense. Satellite imagery revealed unusual activity around the suspected location of the underwater facility. Thermal signatures flickered in and out of existence, while electromagnetic disturbances played havoc with conventional scanning equipment. On the eve of their mission, Philip and Lyra stood on the deck of the launch ship, watching the sun sink below the horizon. The vastness of the Pacific stretched before them, hiding secrets beneath its surface. "Are you ready for this?" Philip asked, his voice barely audible above the sound of the waves. Lyra's hand found his, their fingers intertwining. "As long as we're together, we can face anything." The next morning, as dawn broke over the ocean, Philip and Lyra boarded their submersible. The launch sequence initiated, and they felt the familiar sensation of descent as the vessel slipped beneath the waves. Hours passed as they navigated through the depths, guided by coordinates and their own heightened senses. As they neared the location of the hidden facility, their instruments began to falter. "We're entering some kind of cloaking field," Lyra observed, her fingers dancing over the controls. Philip closed his eyes, focusing his hybrid senses. "I can feel something. A disturbance in the water currents. There's definitely something big down here." Guided by instinct and their unique abilities, they penetrated the cloaking field. What they saw took their breath away. A massive underwater complex sprawled before them, a city beneath the waves. Domes and structures interconnected in a complex network, all hidden from the world above. "It's incredible," Lyra whispered, her eyes wide with awe. Philip nodded, his mind racing. "And potentially catastrophic if those hybrids are unleashed." They identified a concealed entrance designed for submersible vehicles. Using access codes extracted from previously recovered data, they carefully maneuvered their vessel into the airlock. As the airlock cycled and pressurized, Philip and Lyra donned their hybrid-designed environmental suits. The suits, form-fitting and flexible, allowed them to utilize their enhanced abilities while protecting them from the crushing pressures of the deep. With a hiss, the inner airlock door opened. Philip and Lyra stepped into the facility, their senses on high alert. The corridor before them was dimly lit, with an eerie blue glow emanating from bioluminescent panels. They moved silently through the complex, their hybrid physiology allowing them to detect and avoid sophisticated security measures. As they penetrated deeper into the facility, they encountered vast laboratories filled with experimental prototypes. In one chamber, they discovered hybrid creatures with abilities that defied imagination, beings that could manipulate water at a molecular level, others with bioluminescent skin that rendered them nearly invisible in the ocean depths. Philip and Lyra worked quickly, collecting data and samples, documenting everything they encountered. The scale of the operation was staggering, far beyond anything they had previously imagined. As they approached what appeared to be a central command center, Lyra suddenly froze. "Philip," she whispered, her voice tense. "Do you hear that?" Philip focused his enhanced hearing. A faint, rhythmic sound reached his ears, the sound of approaching footsteps. They ducked into an alcove just as a group of hybrid guards rounded the corner, their eyes scanning the corridor. Holding their breath, Philip and Lyra waited as the guards passed. Once the coast was clear, they slipped into the command center. Banks of computers lined the walls, screens displaying data streams and schematics. "Look at this," Philip said, gesturing to a central display. "It's not just this facility. There's a whole network of them, spread across the world's oceans." Lyra's eyes widened as she took in the information. They're creating an entire civilization down here. But why? Before Philip could respond, alarms began to blare throughout the facility. Red lights flashed, and the sound of running feet echoed from the corridors. "We've been detected," Philip said, his muscles tensing for action. "We need to find a way out of here fast." As they turned to leave, the doors to the command center slid shut, trapping them inside. Through the reinforced glass, they could see squads of hybrid guards converging on their position. Philip and Lyra exchanged a determined look. They had come too far to fail now. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together as they always had. The guards began to breach the sealed doors, and Philip and Lyra prepared for the fight of their lives. The fate of two worlds, the surface and this hidden underwater realm, hung in the balance. Balance. Their hearts raced as they prepared for the inevitable confrontation. Suddenly, Philip's eyes locked onto a small maintenance hatch near the floor. "Lyra, over there," he whispered urgently. Without hesitation, they sprinted towards the hatch. Philip wrenched it open as Lyra covered their retreat. They squeezed through the narrow opening just as the guards breached the command center doors. The maintenance tunnel was cramped and dark, forcing them to crawl on their hands and knees. They could hear the shouts and footsteps of their pursuers echoing behind them. "We need to find a way back to our submersible," Lyra said, her voice tight with tension. As they navigated the maze like tunnels, Philip's enhanced senses picked up the faint sound of rushing water. "This way," he urged, leading them towards the noise. They emerged into a vast chamber filled with water purification systems. Massive pipes carried seawater in and out of the facility. Philip quickly assessed their options. "Those pipes lead outside," he said, pointing to a row of large conduits. "If we can access one, it might be our ticket out of here." Lyra nodded, her eyes scanning for a way to breach the pipes. She spotted a control panel nearby. "Cover me," she said, darting towards it. As Lyra worked to override the system, Philip took up a defensive position. The sound of approaching guards grew louder. "How much longer?" Philip asked, tension evident in his voice. "Almost there," Lyra replied, her fingers flying over the controls. Just as the first guards burst into the chamber, Lyra let out a triumphant cry. One of the massive pipes split open, releasing a torrent of water. "Now!" Philip shouted. They dove into the rush of water, their hybrid physiology allowing them to withstand the intense pressure. The current swept them through the pipe and out into the open ocean. Using their enhanced abilities, Philip and Lyra swam swiftly through the dark waters, putting distance between themselves and the hidden facility. They activated their submersible's homing beacon, praying it would reach them before their pursuers could. After what felt like an eternity, they spotted the sleek shape of their vessel cutting through the water towards them. Relief washed over them as they clambered aboard. "Let's get out of here," Philip said, taking the controls. As they sped away from the underwater complex, alarms blared within the submersible. Multiple hostile vessels were in pursuit. "Hang on," Philip warned as he pushed their craft to its limits. Lyra manned the defense systems, using countermeasures to throw off their attackers. The submersible weaved through underwater canyons and thermal vents, slowly losing their pursuers. Finally, after a harrowing chase, they broke the surface. The night sky stretched above them, a welcome sight after the oppressive darkness of the deep. Before they could catch their breath, a bright light illuminated their submersible. For a moment, panic gripped them. Had they been caught? Then a familiar voice crackled over their comm system. "Philip, Lyra, this is Commander Hayes. We've got you. Prepare for extraction." As their submersible was lifted out of the water by a joint human-saurian rescue team, Philip and Lyra finally allowed themselves to relax. They had made it out alive and with invaluable information. The debriefing process was intense and lengthy. Philip and Lyra recounted every detail of their mission, from the advanced hybrid experiments to the vast network of underwater facilities. The implications of their discovery were staggering. As news of their underwater mission spread, Philip and Lyra found themselves thrust into the spotlight. Their unique status as a human-saurian hybrid couple, combined with their heroic actions, captured the imagination of both species. In the weeks that followed, they were called to testify before a joint human-saurian council. The chamber was packed with representatives from both worlds, all eager to hear their first-hand account. Philip stood at the podium, Lyra by his side, as he addressed the assembly. "What we discovered beneath the waves is both a warning and an opportunity," he began. "The hybrid program, in the wrong hands, posed a grave threat, but it also showed us the incredible potential when our species work together." Lyra stepped forward, her scales shimmering under the lights. "We stand before you not just as agents who completed a mission, but as living proof that humans and saurians can coexist in harmony. Our differences are our strength." Their words resonated deeply with the council. In the days that followed, a series of rapid changes swept through both human and saurian societies. The United Nations, in cooperation with saurian leadership, announced the formation of the Interspecies Cooperation and Development Agency. To their surprise, Philip and Lyra were appointed as its first co-directors. Their new roles thrust them into a whirlwind of activity. They oversaw the dismantling of remaining hybrid facilities, ensuring that the technology was repurposed for peaceful means. Under their guidance, teams of human and saurian scientists began collaborative research, leading to breakthroughs in medicine and technology. One afternoon, as they worked late in their new office, Philip received an unexpected call. Dr. Ava Henderson, now in custody, had agreed to cooperate in exchange for leniency. "She wants to meet with us," Philip told Lyra, his expression a mix of curiosity and caution. The meeting took place in a high-security facility. Henderson, looking worn but determined, sat across from them. "I was wrong," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I was pushing the boundaries of science, but I lost sight of the ethical implications. I want to make amends." Lyra leaned forward, her gaze intense. "How?" "I have knowledge that can help us harness hybrid technology for good. Let me work with your scientists. Let me try to undo some of the damage I've caused." Philip and Lyra exchanged a look. It was a risk, but one that could yield significant benefits. "We'll consider it," Philip said finally. "Under strict supervision, of course." As they left the meeting, Lyra took Philip's hand. "Do you think we're doing the right thing?" she asked. Philip squeezed her hand reassuringly. "I think we're doing the best we can. And together, we'll face whatever comes next." Little did they know that their journey was nowhere near the end. As they walked out into the sunlight, arm in arm, the world around them continued to change. Their story, once confined to secret missions and hidden facilities, was about to become a beacon of hope for both their species.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. And for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.